the air inside the small house holds the memory of night, a coolness that clings to the mud brick walls and the beaten earth floor long after the sky outside has begun to change. You open your eyes to a darkness that is not complete, but softened by the faintest suggestion of grey seeping through the single high window. There is no sudden movement, no alarm to jolt you upright. The waking comes slowly, like the rising of water in a well, and you lie for a time on the woven reed mat, simply feeling the texture of the dried stalks against your shoulder blade and the gentle weight of the linen sheet across your legs. Your breath moves in and out at the same unhurried pace it kept while you slept, and the only sound is the distant, rhythmic pulse of the river that has been there all night, a presence as steady as your own heartbeat. After a while you sit up, placing your palms flat against the mat, feeling the slight give of the reeds and the grit of fine sand that always finds its way indoors. The room around you is small and bare, its shapes emerging gradually from the dimness. The curve of a large clay water jar in the corner, the low wooden stool with a folded kilt draped over it, the outline of the doorway that leads to the main room where the cold hearth waits. You stand and the soles of your feet meet the packed floor, which is smooth and cool from the night, polished by years of bare footsteps crossing from sleeping mat to door. Every morning this floor feels the same, a familiar constant that asks nothing of you except that you walk across it. At the water jar you pause and lift the wooden lid, the smell of cool, clean clay rising to meet you. You cup your hands and pour water over your face, once and then again, feeling the trail of droplets run down your neck and into the hollow of your collarbone. The water is faintly earthy, stored in the porous jar so that evaporation keeps it cooler than the air, and it washes away the thin film of sleep that had settled on your skin. You use a corner of your linen kilt to pat your cheeks and chin dry, then take a small sip of the water, holding it in your mouth for a moment before swallowing. The simple act of drinking in the quiet dark is a ritual performed without thought, a routine woven so deeply into your mornings that your hands know exactly what to do without any need for decision. In the main room, the embers from last night's cooking fire have long since turned to pale ash, and the air carries the faint, pleasant smell of burnt acacia wood and the lingering earthiness of yesterday's bread. You take a round flatbread from the covered basket on the low shelf, feeling its coarse surface under your thumb, the little ridges left by the baker's fingers still visible even in the dim light. You tear off a piece and chew it slowly, tasting the nuttiness of emmer wheat and the slight saltiness from the dough, the bread dense and satisfying. Eating is a quiet, solitary act at this hour, and you stand near the doorway looking out at the rectangle of sky that shows a deep indigo just beginning to soften at the very edge, as if someone is slowly adding water to ink. Now you put on your sandals, simple woven papyrus straps that pass between your toes and around your heel, worn soft with use. The strap across the instep leaves a faint impression that will still be there at midday, a pale line on sun-darkened skin. You take up your water skin from its peg on the wall, a goatskin bag that you will fill at the common well before the long day, and you drape its carrying cord across your shoulder. The house offers no farewell, no door to lock or window to shutter, for there is nothing here that needs guarding except the quiet space where you sleep, and that will wait faithfully until you return. Stepping outside, the first thing you notice is the air itself, which is still cool enough to raise the fine hairs on your forearm and carries the scent of moist silt and green growing things from the direction of the river. The village around you is a cluster of similar small houses, their walls the same pale brown as the earth they are made from, their flat roofs silhouetted against the lightening sky. No voices call out yet, no dogs bark. There is only the soft sound of other doors opening, other bare feet or sandaled feet touching the sandy lanes, and the occasional low cough or rustle of a kilt as another worker emerges into the grey pre-dawn. You join this silent movement without needing to speak, falling into step with the slow, scattered procession that flows like separate rivulets toward the main path that leads out of the village. The lane you walk is narrow, lined with the blank faces of houses that all look inward toward their own small courtyards, and the sand underfoot is loose and deep in places, shifting slightly with each step. You feel the slight effort of walking through it, The way your ankle flexes and your toes grip a little, a sensation that will become so constant over the next hour that you will cease to notice it at all. Above you, the stars have not yet faded, though they have grown paler. The brightest ones still hold their places, fixed points of cold white light that seem to watch the slow parade of human figures moving across the dark land. The moon, a thin crescent a few days past new, hangs low near the horizon like a fine paring of shell, giving just enough light to outline the shapes of buildings and the twisting path ahead. You pass the village well, where a single old woman is already drawing water, the creak of the wooden pulley and the soft splash of the bucket entering the depths. A familiar sound that does not disturb the quiet. You stop to fill your water skin, the cool liquid gurgling into the narrow opening, and when you lift it, the weight is a comfortable, grounding presence against your hip. The woman does not speak to you, and you do not speak to her, but there is a brief meeting of eyes, a shared acknowledgement of the hour and the task, and then you move on. Beyond the last houses, the path opens onto the cultivated fields, long narrow strips of dark soil watered by small canals that glitter faintly in the starlight. The smell here is richer, a mix of wet earth, green barley shoots, and the occasional sweetness of clover. The path itself is raised slightly above the fields, packed hard by countless feet and the passage of donkeys carrying loads to and from the river, and you can feel the difference under your sandals. The surface is firmer, more even, allowing your stride to lengthen and settle into an easy rhythm. The sound of your footsteps changes too, from the soft shush of sand to a firmer, duller thud that does not echo, but seems to be absorbed immediately by the dark soil on either side. Now the sky begins its slow transformation, and this is the part of the walk where your gaze lifts and does not come down again for a long time. The deep indigo at the eastern horizon has thinned into a band of pale turquoise, a color so delicate it looks as if it might wash away if you looked at it too hard. And above that band, the darkness still holds, but it is a darkness that is losing its density, becoming translucent. You watch the line between night and day sharpen, and then begin to glow, a faint orange warmth bleeding upward into the turquoise, and turning it first to aquamarine, then to a soft, dusty rose. The stars that were so bright only minutes ago now flicker and vanish one by one, as if each is a tiny lamp being gently blown out, and the crescent moon fades until it is only a faint white scratch against the luminous blue, then nothing at all. The fields on either side of the path slowly reveal themselves, first as indistinct shapes of varying darkness, then as textured surfaces where you can see the individual barley stalks and the way they lean very slightly toward the east, as if even they are straining toward the coming sun. Small birds begin to stir in the reeds along the irrigation canals, a few tentative chirps that do not yet form a chorus, but seem to be testing the silence, and somewhere far off, a donkey brays once, a raw, mournful sound that hangs in the still air, and then fades, leaving the quiet deeper than before. You are not walking alone now. The scattered figures from the village have drawn together along the path, forming a loose column of workers all moving in the same direction at the same steady, unhurried pace. You recognize some of them by their silhouettes. The broad-shouldered man with the slight limp who always walks with a staff of acacia wood. The wiry youth who carries a rolled reed mat balanced on his head as easily as if it were part of his body. The older woman who leads a donkey laden with empty water jars that clink softly together with each step. No one speaks much, and when they do it is in low murmurs that drift back along the line like leaves on water. Brief exchanges about the quality of the stone in the quarry yesterday or the likelihood of a full moon tonight. Practical words that require no answer beyond a grunt of acknowledgement. The path begins to rise almost imperceptibly as you leave the floodplain and move onto the lower slopes of the desert. And here the cultivated fields give way to rougher ground dotted with acacia scrub and the occasional cluster of dry grasses. The soil underfoot changes from dark alluvial silt to a paler, sandier mix studded with small pebbles that shift under your weight with a sound like tiny grinding teeth. The air loses its moisture and its green scent, becoming drier and carrying instead the clean, mineral smell of exposed rock and the faint, dusty aroma of wild thyme crushed underfoot. You feel the first hint of the day's warmth on the back of your neck. Not yet heat, but simply the absence of the night's chill, a gentleness that is almost pleasant. Ahead of you now, growing larger with every step, is the plateau. It rises from the desert floor as a low, flat-topped cliff of pale limestone, its face catching the first direct rays of the sun that has not yet crested the horizon, so that the rock glows with a soft pinkish gold light while everything below it remains in shadow. The sight is one you have seen 1,000 times, yet it never loses its quiet power, the way the light spreads downward over the cliff face like honey poured slowly from the top, illuminating each horizontal stratum and the darker seams of flint that run through the stone in irregular bands. On top of the plateau, still indistinct but unmistakable, is the shape you have been walking toward since you opened your eyes, the half-built tomb of the Pharaoh, a stepped mass of stone blocks and timber scaffolding that breaks the clean line of the horizon with its angular bulk. You do not think of the tomb as a monument to power or a statement of eternal glory. You think of it as you would think of any other worksite, a place where there are stones to be cut and moved and fitted, tasks that fill the hours with the comfortable weight of physical effort. At this distance the details are not visible, only the general outline of the construction ramps zigzagging up the side like the coils of a great serpent, the dark mouths of unfinished chambers, the tiny figures that are already moving on the upper platforms, foreshortened by distance until they seem no larger than ants. Smoke from the morning cook fires of the base camp rises in thin, straight columns, so still is the air, and the sight of those columns reminds you that there will be water and shade and a rest from the sun when you arrive. The sun breaks the horizon now, a brilliant sliver of white gold that forces you to look down for a moment, blinking away the after-image that floats in your vision. When you raise your eyes again, the world has changed completely. The shadow that had been draped over the land like a blanket has been pulled away, and every rock, every bush, every rut in the path is etched with sharp, clear light. The limestone cliff no longer glows pink, but bleaches to a warm cream, and the sky above it is no color you can name. A vast empty bowl of pale blue that seems to press down on the earth with a gentle, immense weight. The heat has not yet arrived in full force, but you can feel it gathering in the air like a held breath, a promise of the long hours to come when the sun will stand directly overhead and turn every shadow into a hard black pool at your feet. Your feet continue to move along the path, which now angles more steeply upward across a stretch of bare rock where the way has been marked by small cairns of stones. The sandals grip the rough surface and you feel the vibration of each step travel up through your shins and into your knees, a sensation that is neither pleasant nor unpleasant, but simply there, part of the rhythm of the walk. The workers around you have spread out again, each finding their own pace on the incline, and the sounds of breathing become more audible, not labored, but deeper, the air drawn in through the nose and released through the mouth in slow, steady streams. You pass a stand of acacia trees, their flat tops casting a dappled shade that you walk through for only a few paces, a brief coolness that touches your shoulders and is gone. The thorns on the branches are long and white and sharp, and you give them a wide berth without thinking, your body knowing the path as well as your mind knows the names of your children. A small lizard, pale as the sand, darts from one rock to another with a faint scratching sound, and you watch it disappear into a crack without breaking stride. The tiny movement a reminder that life goes on all around you, quiet and persistent, even in places that seem barren. By the time you reach the top of the rise and the ground levels out again, the base camp lies before you in full view. A sprawling collection of low tents, open-sided storage sheds, stacks of timber, and rows of water jars that glint in the low sun. The sounds from the camp are still muted at this distance, a low hum of activity that blends the tap of wooden mallets, the scrape of copper on stone, and the murmur of voices into a single continuous note, like the sound of a beehive heard from across a field. The first smell that reaches you is the smoke from the campfires, acrid and sharp, mixed with the dustier scent of limestone powder that hangs in the air around the side and settles on everything, a fine white film that coats the leaves of the nearby scrub and turns the backs of the workers' hands pale. You stop for a moment at the edge of the camp, not out of hesitation, but out of a long habit of pausing before entering the day's work, a small ritual of transition between the quiet of the walk and the steady labor ahead. Your eyes sweep over the familiar scene, the overseer's station under the largest awning, the tool racks where chisels and mallets are already being distributed by the quartermaster's assistants, the wide area of smooth ground where the sledges are assembled, the long ramp that climbs from the camp up toward the plateau and the waiting tomb. Everything is in its place. Everything moves with the slow, predictable rhythm of a task that has been underway for many seasons and will continue for many more, and you are a part of that rhythm, a single beat in the long, slow music of the work. The sun is fully above the horizon now, a perfect circle of blinding light that you do not look at directly, and the shadows it casts are long and thin, stretching westward across the sand. You feel the weight of the water skin against your hip, the slight ache in your shoulders from the walk, the dry taste of dust on your lips, and you are ready. You step forward into the camp, into the smell of smoke and stone, into the sound of tools and voices, into the day that will be like yesterday and like tomorrow, a day of patient, unremarkable work under the vast and quiet sky. The boundary between the open desert and the base camp is marked not by a wall or a gate, but by a change in the texture of the ground underfoot, from the loose, stony sand of the plateau's edge to a surface packed hard by months of tramping feet and the dragging of heavy sledges. You cross that invisible line, and the sounds that were a low murmur from the distance now resolve into distinct nearby noises. The crunch of a wooden mallet tapping against a copper wedge, the dry scrape of a broom made from palm fronds sweeping limestone dust into a pile, the soft grunt of a man lifting a water jar from a stack. The air is already warmer here than on the open path, because the camp sits in a shallow depression that catches the morning sun and holds it, a bowl of still, bright air where the smells of smoke, stone, sweat, and the faintly sour tang of old bread mingle into something that is not unpleasant but simply familiar, the smell of work about to begin. You walk past the first row of storage shelters, simple frameworks of acacia poles lashed together with palm fiber rope and roofed with woven reed mats that rattle softly when a gust of wind moves across the camp, a sound like dry leaves stirring. Beneath these shelters, the shapes of stacked limestone blocks wait in neat rows, each block squared and dressed on 5 faces, the chisel marks still visible as parallel grooves that catch the low light and throw tiny shadows. You run your hand over the top of one block as you pass, feeling the cool, fine-grained surface that has been smoothed with a rubbing stone until it is almost as soft to the touch as polished wood, a texture that never fails to surprise you no matter how many times you feel it. Beyond the storage area, the camp opens into a wider space of bare, flattened earth where the work crews gather each morning. This is the heart of the camp, a roughly circular area defined by the awnings that shade it on 3 sides, and at this hour it is already half filled with workers standing in loose groups or sitting cross-legged on the ground, their voices a low hum that rises and falls in slow waves. You find your usual spot near the northern edge, where a single old sycamore fig tree grows at the very edge of the camp, its trunk twisted and its bark pale grey, and you sit down with your back against the rough bark, feeling the slight give of the living wood and the way the ground has been worn smooth by all the others who have sat here before you. The shade of the tree is thin at this hour because the sun is still low, but it is shade nonetheless, a promise that later in the day this will be a good place to rest. The overseer stands under the largest central awning, where a wooden table has been set up with flat pieces of limestone serving as weights for the papyrus rolls that hold the day's records. He is a man you have known for many seasons, not a foreman who shouts or drives the workers with harsh words, but one who speaks in a low, even voice that carries only because everyone has learned to listen. His skin is deeply lined from years of squinting into the sun, and his kilt is slightly finer than yours, woven with a thin blue stripe at the hem. But otherwise he is like any of you, a worker who has risen to this role by knowing the stone and the ramp and the rhythm of the building better than anyone else. He does not call for silence. The quiet settles naturally as the groups notice his posture and turn their faces toward him, and the talking fades in a gradual way, like the last ripples spreading out from a stone dropped into still water. He begins to speak, and his voice is so steady, so lacking in urgency, that the words seem to blend into the background sounds of the camp, becoming just another texture in the morning air. He names the crews one by one, the quarry team that will go to the western hollow where the beds of fine-grained nummulitic limestone run thick and even, the transport team that will spend the day hauling the blocks already cut, the masons who will work inside the tomb chamber itself, trimming and fitting, the plasterers who will coat the walls of the antechamber with a thin white gypsum wash. You listen for the name of your own crew, and when it comes, assigned to the quarry hollow today, you feel a small settling inside yourself, a quiet satisfaction because you like the quarry work best, the methodical rhythm of cutting stone from the living rock. After the names are spoken, the overseer pauses and looks out over the gathered workers with a gaze that is not inspecting but simply seeing, acknowledging each face in turn, without haste. He offers no long speech, no exhortation to work harder, or praise for the Pharaoh. He says only that the water jars have been filled fresh this morning from the canal, that the noon rest will be in the shaded area on the east side because the west awnings are being repaired, and that anyone who needs a new pair of sandals should speak to the quartermaster before the sun reaches its peak. These small practical details settle over the group like a familiar blanket, and then he nods once and the gathering dissolves. You rise from your place under the sycamore tree and make your way to the tool distribution point, a long, low table made of 3 planks laid across stone supports, behind which 2 young assistants are handing out the implements of the day. The table is worn smooth in places, stained dark with oil from countless hands, and the tools themselves are arranged in neat rows, copper chisels of different widths, the edges bright from sharpening, the wooden handles bound with leather thongs, wooden mallets made from dense acacia wood, their heads slightly flattened from use, coils of rope made from palm fiber, the fibers themselves frayed a little at the ends, but still strong, and a stack of small leather pouches containing fine sand for polishing. You join the short line of workers and wait, and the waiting is not impatience, but a kind of rest in itself, a moment of stillness in which you can feel the sun climbing on your shoulders and listen to the quiet conversations around you. When your turn comes, you hold out your hands and the assistant places a chisel and mallet into them. The chisel has a weight that you know immediately, a familiar heft that balances between the blade and the handle, and you wrap your fingers around the leather binding, feeling the way it has molded to the shape of the hand that used it before you. A hand that is not yours now, but that will be yours by the end of the day, when the leather warms to your grip. The copper blade shows a slight patina of green along the spine, but the cutting edge is a clean line of bright metal, the result of careful sharpening on a fine-grained sandstone hone. You test the edge very lightly with the pad of your thumb, a quick touch that is more habit than necessity, and the sharpness is a smooth, cold line against your skin. The mallet is simpler, a head of acacia wood shaped like a slightly flattened cylinder with a handle that fits into a tapered socket, the whole thing held together by the tightness of the joint and a thin strip of rawhide wrapped around the neck. The wood is dark from the oil of many hands, and the striking face is dented in a shallow curve, a record of thousands of blows delivered over many seasons. You give it a small experimental swing, not hitting anything, just feeling the way the weight of the head pulls through the arc and how the handle settles into your palm, the action as automatic as blinking. These are your tools for the day, and they are good tools, worn but sound, and they will do exactly what you ask of them without complaint. Next you receive the water skin, freshly filled, the goat skin cool and slightly damp on the outside, where a little water has seeped through the pores and evaporated, a natural cooling that will keep the water inside drinkable even when the sun is at its fiercest. You check the wooden stopper, a carved plug of sycamore wood that fits tightly into the neck, and you sling the carrying cord over your shoulder so that the skin rests against your left hip, a counterbalance to the tools in your right hand. The familiar weight is a comfort, a guarantee that the hours ahead will not be spent in thirst. Around you, the other workers are going through the same motions, checking their tools, filling their water skins from the large common jar that the assistants have set on a wooden stand, adjusting the cords of their kilts, wrapping a strip of linen around a palm already calloused. The light is stronger now, the shadows shorter and more sharply defined, and the limestone blocks in the storage area are beginning to throw back a glare that makes you squint slightly. A few workers have already set off toward the quarry hollow, their figures small against the pale ground, and you watch them go for a moment, seeing how the dust rises from their footsteps in little puffs that hang briefly in the still air and then settle, a trail of tiny markers showing the path they have taken. The quartermaster, a man with a slight stoop and eyes that are always slightly narrowed against the dust, moves among the remaining workers with a basket of small supplies, squares of linen for tying around the head, lumps of beeswax for rubbing into the wooden handles to improve the grip, tiny cakes of dried figs wrapped in palm leaves for the midday meal. He offers these without fuss, and you take a fig cake, tucking it into the small pouch that hangs from your belt, a small square of dense sweetness that will taste like the oasis gardens when you eat it later, a reminder of green things and shade. Now the crew separate fully, each group drifting toward its assigned place, and the camp's central area empties slowly, leaving behind only the overseer and the assistants who will remain to manage the stores and the records. The sounds of the morning have shifted, from the low murmur of the gathering to the sharper, more individual noises of preparation, the clink of a copper blade being tested against a stone, the rustle of a palm fiber basket being lifted, the soft grunts of two men heaving a sledge tongue into position. These sounds layer over each other without clashing, a music of labor that you have heard so many times that you no longer hear them as separate notes, but as a single continuous hum, like the sound of the river from a distance. You walk with your crew toward the quarry hollow, a path that leads away from the main camp and angles toward the low cliff that marks the edge of the limestone plateau. The ground here is uneven, scattered with broken chips of stone that have been discarded from earlier cutting, and you pick your way carefully, your sandals finding flat spots automatically. The sun is fully up now, a white gold disk that you cannot look at, but its light fills the world so completely that even the air seems to be made of light, a warm, heavy medium that you move through as if wading in shallow water. The heat is not yet oppressive, merely a presence, a companion that walks beside you and reminds you with every step that this is a day of labor under a sky that will not offer clouds. As you walk, you pass the main construction ramp, a huge inclined plane of rubble and packed earth that rises from the desert floor to the first level of the tomb platform. The ramp is wide enough for 10 men to walk abreast, and its surface is hard and ribbed with the tracks of countless sledge runners, parallel grooves that run straight up the slope like the lines on a papyrus. Workers are already on the ramp, small figures straining against ropes, and the sound of their hauling chant drifts down to you. A low, rhythmic call that has no words you can distinguish, only a melody that rises slightly on the pull and falls on the slide, a breathing pattern set to music. You do not stop to watch. You have seen this 1,000 times, and you will see it 1,000 more, and the sight settles into your mind without demanding attention, like the shape of a mountain or the course of a river. The quarry hollow is a short walk beyond the ramp, a shallow depression in the plateau where the limestone lies close to the surface, its top layer of weathered stone already stripped away by earlier work to reveal the clean beds beneath. The walls of the hollow rise only a little above head height, their faces marked with the vertical lines of earlier cuts and the darker stains where water has been poured to swell the wooden wedges. The floor of the quarry is covered with a layer of fine white dust that shifts underfoot like dry flour, and the smell here is purely mineral, the clean, dry scent of ancient stone that has never seen the sun until this year, this month, this morning. Your crew spreads out along the quarry face, each worker finding a spot where the stone looks good, where the bedding planes are even, and there are no hidden cracks or seams of softer material that might cause the block to fail during shaping. You choose a place near the eastern end, where a block has already been marked out with a line of red ochre, a straight line drawn with the aid of a string pulled taut and snapped against the stone, leaving a faint, dusty trace. The block is perhaps the length of your arm and half as wide, a size that can be cut and trimmed by a single worker in the course of a morning, and you crouch down to examine the ochre line, running your finger along it to feel the slight grittiness of the pigment, noting where the line dips slightly at one corner and making a mental adjustment to your cut. You set your tools down on a flat piece of scrap stone, the chisel and mallet placed side by side, and you take a moment to tie the linen headcloth around your forehead, feeling the immediate relief as the cloth shades your eyes and keeps the sweat from running into them. The water skin rests beside you in the shadow of the quarry wall, still cool, and you know it is there, a reassurance that allows you to focus entirely on the stone in front of you. The first birds of the morning, small brown sparrows that nest in the crevices of the cliff, have begun to chirp somewhere overhead, and their sound is a soft, irregular counterpoint to the deeper, steadier rhythm of the mallets that are already starting to fall. The day's work stretches ahead of you like the stone itself, a solid, defined thing with a beginning and an end, and in between there will be only the slow, patient shaping of the rock, the weight of the mallet, the cold bite of the chisel, and the gradual warming of the air as the sun climbs higher over the tomb. You pick up the chisel, set its point against the ochre line, and feel the first light touch of copper on limestone, a contact so small it makes no sound, a whisper of intention that will soon become the steady, calming music of the quarry. The ochre line on the limestone block is a faint, dusty trace, and you position the point of the copper chisel exactly where the line begins, at the corner nearest you. The first tap of the mallet is so light that it produces almost no sound, just a soft click as the wood meets the metal and the metal meets the stone, a tiny transfer of force that barely dents the surface. You lift the mallet again and let it fall with the same gentle weight, then again, and each tap moves the chisel forward by a hair's breadth, cutting a shallow groove that follows the ochre line with a precision that comes not from concentration but from long familiarity. Your wrist knows how much force to use, your forearm knows the angle at which to hold the blade, your shoulder knows the rhythm that can be sustained all morning without tiring, and these parts of your body work together without any conscious instruction from you, so that your mind is free to drift among the small sensations of the quarry. The sound of your own mallet blends with the sounds of the other mallets in the hollow, and together they create a pattern that is not quite regular, a series of soft, percussive beats that overlap and separate and overlap again, like the sound of slow rain falling on a broad leaf. No two workers swing their mallets at exactly the same moment, so the rhythm is always shifting, a gentle, restless music that fills the quarry hollow and rises into the still air above it. Above that music, there is the fainter sound of the sparrows in the cliff face, the occasional scrape of a sandal on stone as someone shifts position, the distant creak of the sledge ropes from the ramp beyond the quarry wall, and all these sounds together form a kind of quiet that is not silence but a texture, made of many small, unhurried noises. You work your way down the full length of the ochre line, cutting a groove that is shallow and even, no more than the width of your little finger in depth. The limestone yields easily under the copper blade, for this is good stone, fine-grained and free of the hidden flaws that can cause a block to crack along an unintended plane. The dust that rises from the cut is fine and white and settles on your hands and forearms in a thin layer, mixing with the sweat that is beginning to bead on your skin, so that a pale film coats your arms all the way to the elbow. You pause once to brush the dust from your eyes with the back of your wrist, a quick, automatic gesture, and then your hand returns to the chisel and the tapping resumes. After the first groove is cut along the top face of the block, you move around to the side and begin a second groove along the vertical face, following another ochre line that marks the depth at which the block is to be separated from the bedrock. This cut is slightly more awkward because you must crouch low and angle the chisel upward, but your body adjusts to the posture without complaint, your knees pressing into the soft dust of the quarry floor, your back curving into a shape that feels natural even if it would look uncomfortable to anyone watching. The sun has not yet climbed high enough to fill the quarry hollow directly, and the wall of cut stone beside you casts a band of cool shadow that moves very slowly, so slowly that you cannot see it moving, retreating inch by inch across the floor as the sun rises. You work in that shadow while it lasts, knowing without thinking about it that it will be gone before the morning is over. The groove deepens under your chisel, and now you set the tool aside for a moment and take up a handful of fine sand from a small leather pouch on your belt. You sprinkle the sand into the groove, and it fills the narrow channel with a dry, pale grit that will help the copper blade to bite more effectively, grinding away the stone at a microscopic level with each tap. This is a technique that was taught to you by an older worker many years ago, a man whose face you can no longer picture clearly, but whose hands you remember, the way they moved over the stone with such easy confidence. And now your own hands move in the same way, passing the knowledge forward without words. You pick up the chisel and mallet again, and the tapping resumes with a slightly different sound now, a faint grinding note beneath the click, the sand particles shattering and breaking down between the metal and the stone. Time in the quarry does not pass in a straight line, but seems to pool around you, a slow, clear accumulation of moments that all resemble each other so closely that they could be the same moment repeated endlessly. The sun moves, the shadow shrinks, the dust settles on your skin, the chisel wears a little of its sharp edge, and you adjust the angle slightly to compensate, and these small changes are the only markers that the morning is advancing. You do not count the blows of the mallet or measure the depth of the groove. You simply continue, and the groove continues to deepen, and the block continues to take shape under your hands, a shape that was hidden in the stone before you arrived, and that you are only helping to reveal. When the groove is deep enough, you set the chisel and mallet down on the flat piece of scrap stone and flex your fingers, feeling the slight stiffness in the joints that comes from holding the same grip for a long time. The groove now runs around 3 sides of the block, a clean channel that separates the future block from the bedrock on its top, and 2 vertical faces. The 4th face, the back of the block, is still attached to the quarry wall, and this is where the stone must be split, using the natural bedding plane that runs horizontally through the rock at exactly the right height. You run your hand along that bedding plane, feeling the subtle change in texture, a slight coarseness in the grain that marks the boundary between one layer of ancient sediment and the next, and you know that this is where the stone will separate cleanly. Now you need wooden wedges, and you walk the short distance to the supply area at the center of the quarry hollow, where a pile of dry sycamore wedges has been stacked in the shade of an overhanging rock. The wedges are roughly shaped, each one about the length of your forearm, tapered at one end to a blunt edge, the wood pale and fibrous and smelling faintly of sap, even though they were cut weeks ago and have been drying in the sun. You select 3 wedges that are straight-grained and free of knots, weighing them in your hand, feeling the lightness of the dry wood, and you carry them back to your block, along with a small clay bowl that you will use to carry water from the common jar. At the block you set the wedges down, and take the clay bowl to the large water jar that stands at the edge of the quarry, a vessel as tall as your waist and as wide as your outstretched arms, its porous clay sides dark with moisture. The water inside has been carried up from the canal this morning and is still cool, and you fill the bowl carefully, not spilling a drop, because water is precious and every cupful has been hauled by someone's labor. Back at the block, you pour a thin stream of water into the groove along the back face, watching it soak into the dry limestone and darken the pale stone to a warm grey. The water does 2 things. It lubricates the groove so that the wedge will slide in more easily, and it will slowly swell the wooden fibers of the wedge once it is in place, and that swelling pressure is what will split the stone. This is a technique that does not require force, only patience, and you have plenty of patience. You place the first wedge into the back groove and tap it gently with the mallet, seating it firmly, but not driving it deep. The wood makes a dull, solid sound against the stone, a sound that is lower than the chisel's tap, more like a knock on a heavy door. You place the second wedge a hand's breadth to the left of the first, tapping it home with the same gentle pressure, and then the third wedge the same distance to the right, so that the 3 wedges sit in a neat row along the groove, their tapered ends pointing upward at a slight angle. The sun has moved enough now that the first direct light spills over the lip of the quarry wall and touches the tops of the wedges, illuminating the wood grain in bright, sharp detail, and you step back and wait. The waiting is not empty, it is a different kind of work, a work of attention. You listen to the stone, and what you are listening for is the sound of a crack, a tiny, sharp report that means the limestone is beginning to separate along the bedding plane. The stone will give no other warning. It will crack when it is ready, and if you try to force it by driving the wedges too hard, the block may split in the wrong place or shatter into useless fragments. So you stand in the growing warmth, your arms hanging loose at your sides, your weight balanced evenly on both feet, and you listen to the quarry sounds around you and the faint hiss of the water soaking into the groove, and you wait for the sound that you have heard 1,000 times before and that still carries a small quiet satisfaction every time it comes. The crack, when it comes, is a single sharp tick, like the sound of a pebble falling onto a stone floor, and it is followed a few heartbeats later by a second tick, slightly louder, and then a soft, grinding sigh as the full length of the bedding plane releases. You see the block shift just barely, a separation no wider than a fingernail that appears along the back face, and you step forward and tap each wedge once more, very lightly, and the crack widens, a dark line that runs straight and true across the pale stone. The block is now free, detached from the bedrock, and you can feel its independence in the way it responds to the touch of your hand, a slight rocking movement when you press on one corner, a solid weight that is no longer part of the earth. You remove the wedges one by one, setting them aside for the next worker who will need them, and you take up a copper lever, a long bar with a flattened end that you insert into the crack. Leaning your weight on the lever, you feel the block tilt up, its rough underside scraping against the bedrock with a gritty sound, and then it settles back down. A separate thing now, a block of stone that will travel from this hollow up the ramp and into the tomb, where it will become part of a wall or a ceiling or a floor, and no one who passes through that chamber will ever know that it was you who cut it from the earth on this morning. That thought is not a sad one. It is simply a fact, as natural as the dust on your arms and the warmth of the sun on your shoulders. Now the block must be roughly shaped before it can be dragged to the finishing area, and you retrieve your chisel and mallet and begin the work of squaring the edges. The block as it sits now is a little larger than its final dimensions, with uneven corners and a slightly rough face where the bedding plane separated, and your task is to trim away the excess stone until the block is a true rectangle. You work your way around the block, tapping away small spalls that fall into the dust at your feet, and the shape emerges gradually, the corners becoming sharper, the faces becoming flatter, the proportions settling into the familiar dimensions that will allow this block to fit perfectly with the blocks cut by other workers on other mornings. The sun has fully cleared the quarry wall now, and the last of the shadow has withdrawn, leaving you and the block and everything else in the hollow bathed in a light that is white and intense and seems to press down from above with a tangible weight. The dust on your skin has dried and caked in the heat, and you can feel the sweat running in slow lines down your temples and along your spine, soaking into the linen of your kilt and the headcloth tied across your forehead. The water skin is still cool in the shadow of the nearest wall, and you pause to drink, lifting the skin and letting the water flow into your mouth, tasting the slight earthiness of the goat skin and the faint mineral tang of the canal from which it was drawn. The water is not cold anymore, but it is still cooler than the air, and it washes the dust from your throat and leaves a clean, wet coolness that fades slowly as you swallow. After drinking, you return to the block, and now the work is finer, the taps of the mallet lighter and more precise as you smooth the last uneven patches from the faces. The stone under your chisel becomes smoother and smoother, the chisel marks blending into a surface that is almost silky to the touch, and you check your progress frequently by running your palm over the face, feeling for any high spots or rough areas that need more attention. This is the part of the work that requires the most patience, because the stone is hard and the changes are small, and there is no rushing a task that depends on thousands of tiny strokes, each one removing only a pinch of dust. But you have all morning, and the morning is long, and there is nowhere else you need to be. Around you the other workers in the quarry are at similar stages in their own tasks, some still cutting grooves into fresh blocks, others splitting the stone with wedges, others shaping and smoothing with the same patient rhythm you are using. The quarry hollow has filled with the dust of the morning's labor, a fine white haze that hangs in the air and catches the sunlight so that the whole space seems to glow with a soft, diffuse light. The dust settles on everything, on the workers' hair and shoulders, on the tool racks and the water jars, on the sparrows that have grown bold and hop among the scrap stones pecking at invisible specks. The smell of the quarry has intensified, the clean mineral scent of freshly cut limestone now mixed with the fainter, earthier odor of the wedges and the slightly salty tang of human sweat. And these smells are not strong enough to be unpleasant, but are simply the background against which the morning unfolds. You finish the last face of the block and set the chisel and mallet down, your arms heavy with the pleasant tiredness of sustained effort, your palms marked with the impressions of the tool handles, your fingers slightly stiff but still nimble. The block sits before you, square and true, its faces pale and smooth, ready to be moved. You take a moment to look at it, not with pride exactly, but with a quiet sense of completion, the feeling of a task that had a beginning and now has an end, a small, clean arc in the long curve of the day. In a little while the transport crew will come with their sledge and their ropes, and the block will be taken away, and you will begin another one, and the cycle will repeat until the sun drops low and the shadows grow long and the overseer's signal calls you back to the camp for the evening meal. But for now, there is still the hush of the mid-morning quarry, the heat gathering and the light pressing down, and you sit on the ground with your back against the block you have just shaped, feeling the coolness of the stone seeping through your damp kilt, a small relief from the mounting heat of the day. You close your eyes for a moment, and the sounds of the quarry continue around you, the soft tapping of the other mallets, the scrape of a lever against stone, the far-off chanting of the haulers on the ramp, all of it blending into a low, steady hum that is as soothing as the sound of the river at night. You breathe in the dusty air and out again, and you wait, without hurry, for whatever comes next. The stone against your back is a cool, steady presence, a slab of limestone that has not yet absorbed the full heat of the day and still holds a memory of the deep earth from which it was cut. You sit with your eyes closed and your hands resting loose on your thighs, palms up, the fingers slightly curled, and you let the tiredness that has gathered in your shoulders and forearms simply exist without trying to push it away. Tiredness is a natural part of the morning, a sensation that arrives and then passes, like the shadow that moved across the quarry floor and is now gone. Your breath flows in and out through your nose, slow and even, and the dust that hangs in the air settles on your lips with a faint, chalky dryness that you do not bother to wipe away. The sounds of the quarry continue their slow, irregular rhythm around you, the tapping of mallets on chisels, the scrape of a lever being repositioned, the crunch of sand under someone's sandals, and beneath all of that the distant, steady drone of the hauling chant from the ramp, a sound so constant that it has become a kind of silence itself. A sparrow lands on the corner of your block with a soft flutter of brown wings and a tiny, sharp chirp, and you open your eyes just enough to watch it hop twice along the squared edge, its head cocked to one side, its black eye bright and unblinking. It stays for only a few heartbeats before launching itself back into the air, and you close your eyes again, the image of the small bird lingering behind your eyelids like an afterimage of movement. The sun has climbed to the midpoint of its morning arc, and the heat is now a weight that presses down on the quarry hollow with a gentle, insistent pressure, filling every space that the shadow has abandoned. The air shimmers slightly above the pale stone, a rippling distortion that makes the far wall of the quarry seem to waver as if seen through moving water, and the smell of hot rock has intensified, a dry, clean scent that reminds you of the way stones smell after a fire has burned out and the ashes have cooled. Your water skin rests in the narrow band of shade at the base of the quarry wall, and you reach for it without opening your eyes, your hand finding the familiar shape of the goatskin by touch alone. The slightly rough texture of the hide, the cool dampness of the surface where evaporation has done its slow work. You drink again, and this time the water is warmer, the coolness almost gone, but it still washes the chalky taste from your mouth and soothes the dryness in your throat. You hold the water in your mouth for a moment before swallowing, feeling the way it spreads across your tongue and the insides of your cheeks, and then you replace the stopper and set the skin back in the shade, knowing that you will reach for it again in a little while and it will be there, a small, reliable comfort. The signal for the mid-morning pause comes not from any human voice, but from the sun itself, or rather from the position of the sun as it reaches a certain height above the eastern cliff. And this is a measurement that every worker knows without needing to be told. A horn made from the horn of a ram sounds from the direction of the camp, a single long, low note that carries across the quarry and the ramp and the storage areas, a note that is neither loud nor urgent but simply present, a sound that means the same thing every day. Put down your tools, find shade, drink water, rest your body. The sound fades slowly into the heated air, and in its wake there is a brief collective pause, a moment when every mallet stops falling and every chisel falls silent. And then the quarry fills with the softer sounds of tools being set down and sandals shuffling toward the shaded areas. You rise from your place against the block, your muscles protesting slightly at the change in position, a stiffness in your lower back and the backs of your thighs that will ease as you move. The quarry workers are all drifting now toward the same spot, a large awning that has been set up on the eastern side of the hollow, a rectangle of heavy linen stretched over a framework of acacia poles, its edges flapping very gently in the faint breeze that has begun to stir, a breeze so slight that it is more a suggestion of air movement than a true wind. The shade under the awning is deep and dark, a welcome contrast to the white glare of the quarry floor, and as you step into it, you feel the temperature drop immediately, a coolness that wraps around your shoulders and the back of your neck like a damp cloth. The ground under the awning has been covered with woven palm frond mats, their surface rough and fibrous but clean, and the workers settle onto these mats in the same way they settle into every rest period, with the slow, comfortable movements of people who know exactly how long the pause will last and intend to use every moment of it. Some sit cross-legged with their backs straight, others lie on their sides with their heads propped on one hand, and a few simply stretch out on their backs with their eyes closed and their arms loose at their sides, the pose of complete surrender to rest. You choose a spot near the edge of the awning where you can feel the breeze on your face while your body remains in the shade, and you sit with your legs folded and your hands resting on your knees, a posture that opens your chest and allows your breath to deepen. The worker next to you is a man you have known for many seasons, a man whose name you use only occasionally because most communication between you happens without words, in the shared rhythm of the quarry and the simple exchange of tools and the quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence. He offers you a piece of dried date pressed into a flat cake, and you take it with a nod, the sweetness of the date spreading across your tongue as you chew, the texture dense and slightly gritty with fine sand that no amount of wrapping can keep out entirely. You chew slowly, and the sugar in the date seems to wake up your body a little, a small surge of energy that you know will fade gently into the general calm of the rest period. The conversations under the awning are low and unhurried, fragments of talk that drift from one group to another without demanding attention. Someone mentions that the stone in the western end of the quarry is running thinner than expected, that the good beds may be exhausted before the next moon. Someone else tells a brief story about a dream they had the night before, a dream involving a river that flowed uphill and fish that swam through the air like birds, and the story is received with quiet chuckles and a moment of comfortable silence. An older worker, a woman whose hands are so calloused that the palms gleam like polished wood, is showing a younger worker how to sharpen a chisel on a piece of sandstone, demonstrating the correct angle with slow, patient strokes, and the young worker watches with an intensity that reminds you of yourself many years ago, when every task was new and the quarry seemed like a place of endless mysteries. You do not join any of these conversations, but you listen to them with the same detached attention you might give to the sound of the sparrows or the rustle of the awning in the breeze, letting the words wash over you without needing to respond or even to understand. The rest period is not a time for talking, or rather it is not a time when talking is necessary. It is a time for stillness, for letting the body recover from the morning's labor, for drinking water and eating a small portion of food and feeling the sweat dry on your skin in the shade. A dung beetle is crossing the mat near your knee, pushing a small ball of packed sand and debris that is almost as large as its own body, its back legs working with a steady, mechanical determination that seems both absurd and admirable. You watch the beetle for a long time, tracing its slow progress across the woven fronds, noting how it navigates around a stray fiber that must seem like a fallen tree to its tiny perception, how it pauses every few steps as if to assess its direction and then resumes its pushing with the same unwavering purpose. The ball wobbles slightly as it rolls, and once the beetle loses control and the ball tips sideways into a depression in the mat, and the beetle rights it again with a series of small, precise movements of its legs and head, and then the journey continues. You have no idea where the beetle is going or why, and you do not need to know. The simple fact of its existence, its quiet persistence in a task that has no meaning to you, is enough to fill the long, slow minutes of the pause. The breeze stirs again, a little stronger this time, and it carries with it a different smell, the faint green scent of the river and the cultivated fields beyond the desert plateau. That smell is a reminder that the world is larger than the quarry, that beyond the white dust and the pale stone there is water and mud and growing things, that somewhere people are fishing in the shallows and women are grinding grain, and children are chasing each other through the lanes of the village. The thought is not a distraction or a longing. It is simply a fact that settles into your mind and then passes, replaced by the more immediate sensation of the shade on your skin and the taste of date still lingering on your tongue. The ram's horn will sound again when it is time to return to work, but that moment is not yet here, and the pause stretches on with a slow, elastic quality that makes a short time feel long and a long time feel short, a suspension of the usual rhythm that is as restful as the shade itself. You close your eyes and let your head tip forward slightly, your chin coming to rest on your chest, and in this position you are not sleeping, but simply resting more deeply, your awareness drawn inward to the steady beat of your heart and the rise and fall of your breath. The sounds of the camp continue around you, the murmur of voices and the distant creak of ropes and the soft flap of the awning, but they seem to come from farther away now, as if you are listening to them through a layer of water, and they blend together into a single, continuous sound that is not quite silence, but is as close to silence as the world ever gets. Time passes without measure, and then the horn sounds again, the same low, long note, and the rest period ends as gently as it began. There is no rush to stand, no scramble to pick up tools. The workers under the awning stir slowly, stretching their arms and rolling their shoulders, blinking in the dim light as their eyes adjust to the idea of the bright quarry beyond. You open your eyes and lift your head, and the world comes back into focus, the white stone and the blue sky and the shimmer of heat haze above the quarry wall, and you feel the readiness return to your limbs, a quiet willingness to pick up the chisel and mallet again, and resume the work. You stand and brush the dust from your kilt, feeling the slight stiffness that still lingers in your knees, a stiffness that will work itself out after the first few minutes of movement. The other workers are standing too, their shadows stretching long and thin across the quarry floor as they move back toward their blocks, and the air under the awning already feels warmer than it did a moment ago, as if the shade is losing its power now that the rest period has officially ended. You take one last drink from your water skin, a small sip that wets your mouth, and then you walk back out into the fall sun, feeling the heat close around you like a heavy garment, familiar and not unwelcome. Your block waits where you left it, square and pale and solid, and the chisel and mallet lie beside it on the flat piece of scrap stone, exactly as you placed them. You pick up the tools and feel the weight settle into your hands, the handles still warm from the morning's use, the leather bindings soft against your palms. The sun is higher now, the shadows shorter, the air thicker with heat and dust, and the afternoon's work stretches ahead of you, a continuation of the morning's rhythm, a slow, steady progress that will carry you through the remaining hours of daylight without hurry or strain. You set the chisel against the next oak line on the next block, and the first tap of the mallet is as soft and precise as the first tap of the morning, a small, clear sound that marks the beginning of the second half of the day. The ram's horn has not sounded again, but a different signal comes now, a quiet word passed from the overseer's assistant who walks through the quarry hollow with a calm, unrushed stride, touching workers on the shoulder and murmuring that the transport crew needs extra hands for the afternoon. You set down your chisel and mallet, leaving them on the flat piece of scrap stone where they will wait for your return, and you brush the white dust from your forearms with a few slow sweeps of your palm. The block you are shaping is only half finished, its edges still rough, but it will not go anywhere. Stone is patient, and you will come back to it when the hauling is done. You follow the assistant out of the quarry and across the open ground between the hollow and the storage area, where the blocks that were cut and shaped earlier in the week sit in neat rows under the reed mat shelters. The sun is now directly overhead, a white coin of fire that seems to have burned away all shadows except the small dark pools directly beneath each block and each acacia post. The heat is at its fullest, a dry, pressing weight that wraps around your whole body, and the air shimmers with such intensity that the distant ramp and the figures upon it seem to dance and wobble as if reflected in moving water. You pull the linen headcloth lower over your forehead and squint against the glare, your feet finding the familiar path by memory as much as by sight. At the storage area, a transport crew is already assembling around a single large block that has been chosen for the next ascent. The block is larger than the one you shaped in the quarry this morning, perhaps as long as 2 men lying head to foot and as high as your waist, its 6 faces squared and smoothed until they gleam a pale cream in the sunlight. A wooden sledge waits beside it, a heavy platform made of thick cedar planks, joined with mortise and tenon, and reinforced with copper bands, its front end curved upward like a runner to prevent it from digging into the ground. The sledge is old and dark with oil and use, its surface polished by the passage of countless stones, and it sits on the packed earth with the solid weight of something that has been doing this same work for many years and will continue doing it for many more. The crew leader, a broad-shouldered man with a deep, calm voice, is already organizing the ropes. There are 8 of you in total, a number that will make the pull steady and even, each worker sharing an equal part of the load. You take your place without being told, moving to the left side of the sledge near the front, where a loop of palm fiber rope has been laid out on the ground, and you bend to pick it up, feeling the coarse, twisted fibers against your palm. The rope is thick, as wide as 2 of your fingers, and it has been used so many times that the fibers are worn smooth in the places where hands grip it, a dark patina that marks the hold of each previous hauler. You fit the loop over your shoulder and across your chest, adjusting it so that the rope lies flat against your collarbone without chafing, and you take a moment to wind a strip of linen around your palm for extra padding, tucking the end under itself with a neat, practiced motion. The other workers are doing the same, settling the ropes over their shoulders, adjusting their stances, finding the distance from the sledge that will give the best angle of pull. There is no hurry in these preparations. The block is heavy and will move only when everything is ready, and so the readiness is allowed to develop at its own pace. The crew leader walks around the sledge, checking each rope connection, testing each knot with a foam tug, and he speaks in a low voice that is more a series of hums and murmurs than actual words, a sound of reassurance and attention that settles the group into a shared focus. Now the path must be prepared. 2 workers take up clay jars filled with water mixed with fine river silt, a thin, slippery mud that will be poured onto the ground in front of the sledge runners to reduce friction. You watch as they walk ahead, tilting the jars so that the grey-brown liquid flows out in a steady stream, spreading across the packed earth and soaking in, darkening the pale ground to a wet, glistening ribbon that stretches toward the ramp like a dark road laid down just for this journey. The smell of the wet earth rises, a rich, muddy scent that is a welcome change from the dry dust of the quarry, and you breathe it in as you wait, feeling the cool moisture in the air near the ground, a small, temporary relief from the heat. The mud glistens for a moment and then begins to dry at the edges, the sun pulling the moisture from it with an eagerness that you can almost see, and the crew leader knows that the moment to pull is now while the track is still slick. He does not shout a command, but gives a low, drawn-out call, a single vowel sound that rises slightly at the end and then falls, and the 8 of you lean forward as one, taking up the slack in the ropes. You feel the rope tighten across your chest, the fibers pressing into the linen wrap, and your body leans into the angle of the pull with a slow, sustained effort that engages your legs and your back and your shoulders all at once, a full body commitment to the task. The first pull is the hardest, not because the block is unbearably heavy, but because it is still at rest, and rest has a kind of grip on objects that must be broken before motion can begin. You feel the resistance through the rope, a stubborn, solid weight that does not yield, and then there is a tiny shift, a barely perceptible movement, and the sledge runners break free of the ground with a soft, sucking sound as the mud releases its hold. The block begins to slide, and the resistance changes from a dead weight to a live, moving weight, still heavy but now cooperating, and your body adjusts to the new sensation, the strain settling into a rhythm that your muscles can sustain. The sledge moves slowly, so slowly that a person walking at a normal pace would leave it far behind, and this slowness is the whole point of the work. A fast pull would burn out the haulers in minutes and risk the sledge catching and overturning, but a slow, steady pull can be maintained for hours, and it is this steady pull that you settle into now, your feet taking small, deliberate steps, your breath matching the pace of the movement, your eyes fixed on the ground just ahead of your feet, where the mud track glistens. The rope creaks with a rhythmic sound, a low, fibrous groan that rises and falls with each step, and the sledge runners make a soft hissing noise as they slide over the wet ground, a noise like the sound of a long, slow exhale. The chant begins without anyone deciding to start it, a low hum that emerges from the group as naturally as breath. It is a simple sound, a single note that dips and rises, and its purpose is not musical, but practical, keeping the 8 of you in perfect time so that no one pulls too hard or too softly. You join the chant without thinking, your voice blending with the others, and the sound vibrates in your chest and throat, a grounding sensation that connects you to the rope and the sledge and the block and the other workers in a single, unified effort. The chant is not a song with words. It is older than words, a pattern of sound that has been used for this same task since the first stone was dragged from the first quarry, and it will be used long after you are gone, a thread of continuity that runs through generations of workers like the grain through a piece of wood. Your feet find the rhythm of the chant, and the rhythm becomes the whole world. The sun beats down on your shoulders and the back of your neck, and sweat drips from your forehead onto the dry ground beyond the edge of the mud track, leaving small dark spots that vanish in seconds. The rope rubs against your shoulder with a dull, warm friction, and you can feel the muscles in your thighs and calves working with each step, a deep, slow burn that is not painful, but simply present, a sensation as familiar as the sound of your own breathing. The dust kicked up by the sledge runners mixes with the smell of the wet mud and the faint, sharp tang of your own sweat, and this combination of smells becomes the scent of the afternoon, a scent that you will always associate with the weight of the rope and the slow, swaying motion of the block behind you. The path from the storage area to the foot of the ramp is not long, but the slowness of the pole stretches the distance, so that each step seems to cover only a handspan of ground. You pass the outer edge of the storage shelters and move into the open plain between the camp and the ramp, and here the wind has picked up slightly, a hot, dry breeze that blows from the desert and carries a fine grit that sticks to your sweaty skin. The breeze offers no cooling, only the faint, dusty smell of the open desert, a smell of hot stone and dry brush and the distant, mineral tang of the high cliffs. You feel the grit on your lips and taste it when you run your tongue over them, a fine, sandy texture that is not unpleasant, just another small sensation in the long, slow journey. The sledge slides over a patch where the mud has been spread thinner, and the sound of the runners changes to a grittier scrape, a reminder that the track is drying fast under the sun. One of the water carriers walks ahead with a jar, pouring fresh mud onto the track just before the runners reach it, and the hissing sound returns, smoother and wetter, and the pull becomes slightly easier for a few strides. This is the rhythm of the haul, the slow step, the creak of the rope, the hiss of the runners, the low hum of the chant, the occasional splash of fresh mud, and the steady, burning presence of the sun above it all. You notice the shadow of the sledge and the block moving along the ground beside you, a dark shape that glides over the pale earth with an eerie silence, a perfect silhouette of the stone and the wooden frame and the curved runners. The shadow is distorted by the angle of the sun, stretched long and thin, and it ripples slightly as it passes over the uneven ground, a dark, wavering companion that keeps pace with you step for step. Watching the shadow is easier than watching the block itself, because the block is bright and reflects the sun into your eyes, while the shadow is dark and restful, a patch of coolness that exists only in your vision. The crew leader's call changes slightly now, a new note that means the ramp is near, and you lift your eyes and see the great incline rising ahead of you. The ramp is a massive structure of compacted rubble and earth, its surface worn hard and smooth by the passage of many sledges, its slope gentle enough that a teen can haul a stone up it without losing control. At its base, where the flat ground meets the rising slope, there is a wide, level staging area where blocks are often left to wait before the final ascent, and this is your destination. The ramp itself is busy with other teams already on its slope, their figures small and foreshortened, their ropes stretching back down toward the ground like thin, dark threads, and the sound of their chanting floats down to you, a distant, layered harmony that overlaps with your own chant and becomes part of the general noise of the site. The sledge slows as you approach the staging area, and the crew leader gives the call to ease off, a long, falling note that signals the gradual release of tension. You feel the rope slacken against your chest, and you straighten your back with a slow, careful movement, the muscles along your spine stretching and settling into a new position. The sledge comes to a stop with a soft, final hiss, and the block sits motionless on its wooden platform, a massive, patient object that has moved only a short distance, but has required the full effort of 8 people to do so. You slip the rope loop off your shoulder and let it fall to the ground, and the relief is immediate. A lightness in your chest and shoulders that makes you feel almost buoyant, as if you might float up into the hot, still air. You walk a few steps away from the sledge and stand with your hands on your hips, breathing deeply, feeling the sweat cool on your skin as the breeze finds the damp patches on your kilt and your headcloth. Your legs are tired but not exhausted, a deep, pleasant tiredness that comes from sustained effort, and your arms hang loose at your sides, the palms reddened from the rope and the linen wrap. The other workers are doing the same, standing in loose poses of recovery, drinking from their water skins, wiping their faces with the corners of their kilts, exchanging a few quiet words about the pull and the condition of the track. The staging area at the foot of the ramp is a busy place, with several blocks already waiting on their sledges, each one marked with a small ochre symbol that indicates its destination within the tomb. Workers from other crews are checking the ropes on these blocks, adjusting the mud tracks, and preparing for the next stage of the journey, the long ascent up the ramp to the upper platforms. You will not be part of that ascent today. Your crew's task was only to bring the block from the storage area to this point, and now the block is here, resting quietly on its sledge, and your part in its journey is complete. You find a patch of shade at the edge of the staging area, a narrow band cast by a stack of timber poles, and you sit down with your back against the rough wood, feeling the solidness of it, the way it does not give at all. The water skin is warm now, but you drink anyway, letting the water run slowly down your throat, and you close your eyes for a moment, feeling the thrum of your pulse in your temples and the slow, steady return of calm to your body. The sounds of the ramp and the camp and the distant quarry all blend together into that familiar, low hum, and you sit in the shade, waiting for the signal that will send you back to the quarry or to another sledge, content to rest and to breathe and to let the afternoon continue its slow, unhurried course toward evening. The staging area at the foot of the ramp is a place of transition, a flat expanse of packed earth where the horizontal journey ends and the vertical journey waits, and in this space the blocks rest on their sledges like sleeping animals gathering strength for the climb. You sit in the narrow band of shade cast by the stacked timber poles, your back against the rough, warm wood, your water skin cradled in your lap, and you watch the slow, deliberate movements of the ramp crews as they prepare their loads for the ascent. The heat of the afternoon has reached its full intensity, a thick, golden weight that seems to slow everything down, so that the workers moving across the staging area appear to wade through the air rather than walk, their gestures languid, their shadows pooled dark and short beneath them. A second transport crew is forming near the sledge you helped bring from the storage area, and the crew leader, a different man this time, thinner and older, with a grey-streaked beard and eyes that squint perpetually against the glare, walks among the waiting workers, touching each one on the arm as he assigns positions. His touch is light and quick, a small gesture of inclusion, and when he reaches you, he pauses and tilts his head toward the ramp, a silent question that you answer by rising to your feet and dusting off your kilt. The shade falls away from your shoulders as you step back into the sun, and the heat closes around you again, a familiar pressure that you accept without resistance, because resistance would only make it heavier. You join the new crew at the rear of the sledge, where 2 long ropes have been laid out on the ground, their ends already spliced to the heavy wooden crossbar that will distribute the pull evenly across the sledge's width. The rope you pick up is slightly different from the one you used before, a little thicker in the weave and darker with age, and the fibers have been softened by so many hands that they feel almost velvety against your palm. You settle the loop over your shoulder in the same way as before, letting it cross your chest diagonally, and you take a moment to adjust the fit so that the pressure will be spread wide and even across your collarbone and your upper back. The other haulers are doing the same, and you can see the small individual adjustments each person makes. A strip of leather wrapped around the rope where it rubs, a linen pad tucked under the loop, a slight shift in stance as someone tests the angle of pull with a few experimental leans. The ramp ahead of you rises in a long, straight line from the staging area up to the first level of the tomb platform, a distance that would be short if you were walking freely, but will become long and slow under the weight of the block. Its surface is a patchwork of different materials, packed rubble and crushed limestone and hardened mud, all compressed by the passage of countless sledges into a surface as hard as fired brick. The tracks of previous holes are visible as 2 parallel grooves that run straight up the center of the ramp, worn deep and smooth by the runners, and between those grooves the ground is rougher, dotted with small stones and the occasional scatter of dry desert brush that has blown up from the plain. The angle of the ramp is gentle enough that it does not look steep from the bottom, a gradual incline that rises no more than the height of a man for every 20 paces of forward movement. But you know from experience that this gentleness is deceptive, that the slope will make itself felt in your legs and your lungs before you reach the top. The mud carriers have already been at work on the ramp, pouring their mixture of water and river silt into the runner grooves so that the track glistens dark and wet all the way up, a pair of shining lines that reflect the pale sky and seem to narrow as they climb, converging toward a distant point where the ramp meets the platform. The wet mud sends up a faint, earthy steam in the heat, and the smell of it reaches you as a cool, damp note in the dry air, a reminder of the river and the fields and the green world that lies beyond the desert's edge. The crew leader takes his position at the front of the sledge, near the curved runner, and he raises one hand in a gesture that is not a command, but an invitation, a signal that the moment of beginning is here. The other workers settle into their ropes, and you do the same, leaning forward just enough to take up the slack, feeling the fibers tighten and the weight of the sledge transmit itself through the rope and into your body. The block on the sledge is the same one you helped move from the storage area, and you recognize the small ochre mark on its top face, a symbol that looks like a reed leaf and an angle, the mark of the masons who will receive it on the upper platform. The block sits motionless and patient, its pale faces gleaming in the sun, and for a moment before the pull begins, you feel the full, silent mass of it, a weight so solid and immovable that it seems impossible that human hands could shift it at all. Then the crew leader begins the chant, the same low, wordless hum that you joined earlier in the morning, and the team leans into the pull as one body, 8 pairs of legs pushing against the packed earth, 8 backs straightening, 8 sets of shoulder muscles tightening against the ropes. The sledge resists for a long, slow moment, the runners stuck slightly in the mud where the track has begun to dry at the very bottom, and then there is a soft, wet release, and the whole assembly begins to move, sliding forward onto the incline with a sound like a long, slow breath drawn in through teeth. The change in the pull is immediate and unmistakable. On the flat ground, the effort was a steady, horizontal strain that demanded a forward lean and a constant, even pressure. But on the ramp, the angle of the effort shifts, and you feel the weight of the block pressing not just against your chest, but downward, as if the stone has grown heavier and is trying to slide back toward the plane. You adjust your stance automatically, leaning farther forward, digging the balls of your feet into the hard surface of the ramp, and the muscles in your thighs and calves engage with a deeper, slower burn, a sensation that spreads up through your hips and into your lower back. Your breath, which had been steady and easy during the flat pull, now comes in longer, more deliberate cycles, each inhale filling your chest completely, and each exhale lasting a beat longer than it did before. The ramp stretches ahead of you, and the world shrinks to the small patch of ground directly in front of your feet. The dark, wet track of the runner groove, the slow, rhythmic sound of the chant, and the creak of the ropes and the hiss of the sledge sliding over the mud. You do not look up because looking up would show you how far there is still to go, and that knowledge is not helpful. It is better to focus on the step you are taking right now, the shift of weight from one foot to the other, the steady, rocking motion of the pull that becomes almost hypnotic as the minutes pass. Your body finds a rhythm that is slower than a walking pace but faster than a standstill, a deliberate, measured progress that can be maintained for a long time if you do not push too hard or try to rush. The sounds of the ramp are different from the sounds of the quarry or the flat ground, muffled and close, enclosed by the rising walls of rubble that flank the ramp on both sides. The chant of your crew seems to echo slightly, bouncing back from the rubble walls with a soft, blurred quality, and the creak of the ropes and the hiss of the runners are magnified by the proximity of those walls, so that every small noise is clear and distinct. You can hear the breathing of the worker next to you, a steady, deep sound that matches your own, and you can hear the grit crunching under the sledge runners as they pass over a patch where the mud has been mixed with fine sand, a sound like the grinding of tiny teeth. The sun beats down on the ramp with a direct, unshaded intensity, for there are no awnings here and no shadows except the narrow ones cast by the rubble walls, which offer no relief at midday. The heat rises from the ground as well as falling from the sky, a double assault that wraps around your ankles and climbs up your legs, and the sweat that drips from your forehead and your chin falls onto the dry patches of the ramp and vanishes instantly, absorbed by the thirsty earth. Your linen headcloth is soaked through, and you can feel the damp fabric against your temples, a small clinging coolness that is the only relief the sun allows. The ramp does not go straight up the face of the plateau, but zigzags in a gentle switchback, and after what feels like a long time, but is probably only a short while, you reach the first turning point where the track levels out briefly, before angling upward again in the opposite direction. The crew leader calls for a pause here, a short rest on the level section where the sledge can sit without straining against the ropes, and you straighten your back with a slow, careful movement, feeling the vertebrae click softly into place, the muscles along your spine trembling slightly from the sustained effort. You release the rope loop from your shoulder and let it hang loose, and you place your hands on your lower back and stretch gently, arching backward, feeling the deep ache in your legs and the pleasant, heavy tiredness in your shoulders. The view from the turning point is different from the view at the bottom of the ramp, and you take a moment to look out over the plain below. The camp spreads out like a map drawn on pale earth, the storage shelters and the awnings and the tool racks all reduced to small, neat squares and rectangles, and the workers moving among them are no larger than the dung beetle you watched during the morning rest. The quarry hollow is visible off to the left, a darker patch in the pale ground, and beyond it the desert stretches away in a series of low, rolling ridges that fade from gold to grey to a distant hazy blue. The sky is a vast, empty dome of pale white blue, and the sun is a brilliant point of light that you cannot look at directly, its reflection shimmering off every surface. The pause is short, just long enough for everyone to catch their breath and take a drink of water, and then the crew leader raises his hand again and the chant resumes, and you settle the rope back over your shoulder and lean into the pull. The second section of the ramp is slightly steeper than the first, and you feel the increase in effort immediately, the way your thighs burn a little deeper and your breath comes a little harder. The chant adjusts to the new slope, the tempo slowing fractionally, the notes dropping lower, and you match your steps to the slower rhythm, taking smaller, more deliberate paces, planting each foot with care on the hard, rutted surface. The sledge runners squeal softly as they pass over a patch where the mud has been scraped thin by previous hauls, and one of the mud carriers steps forward quickly with a jar and pours a fresh stream of grey-brown liquid directly in front of the runner, and the sound changes back to the wet, steady hiss. The mud carrier is a young man with a smooth face and strong arms, and he moves with a practiced rhythm, walking backward up the ramp just ahead of the sledge, pouring the mud in a careful, even stream, his eyes watching the track and the runners and the crew leader all at once. He does not speak, and no one speaks to him. He is simply part of the machinery of the haul, a moving component that keeps the whole system working. The climb continues, and time becomes something measured not in heartbeats or breaths, but in the slow, steady count of the chant and the gradual passage of the ramp beneath your feet. You notice small details as you move. A crack in the rubble wall where a clump of dry grass has taken root, its stalks pale and brittle, but still alive. A discarded copper chisel lying half buried in the ramp surface, its blade worn down to a stub. The faint, faded imprint of a sandal in a patch of dried mud from an earlier pour, preserved like a fossil. These details appear and then slide past as you climb, each one a tiny marker of distance, a proof that you are moving even when the movement feels impossibly slow. Your body has settled into a state that is not quite fatigue and not quite comfort, a middle place where the effort has become so constant that you no longer feel it as a separate sensation, where the burn in your muscles and the rhythm of your breath and the weight of the rope have all blended into a single, unified experience of forward motion. Your mind, freed from the need to direct your body, drifts into a calm, detached awareness, observing the climb without participating in it, as if you are watching yourself from a small distance. This is the state that all haulers know, the long, slow trance of the ramp, and it is not unpleasant, it is peaceful in its own way, a quiet suspension of thought and time. The top of the ramp draws closer with each step, and you can see the edge of the upper platform now, a flat line of pale stone that marks the end of the climb. The platform is busy, filled with workers and blocks and scaffolding, and the sounds of activity drift down to you, the tap of mallets and the scrape of chisels and the low murmur of voices growing louder as you approach. The crew leader's chant changes one last time, the notes rising slightly, and the pace of the pull quickens just a little, a final, sustained effort that carries the sledge up the last few paces and over the lip of the ramp onto the level surface of the platform. The transition from the incline to the flat ground is a sudden release, and you feel the weight of the block change character instantly, the downward pull vanishing, the strain in your legs and back easing into a simpler, horizontal effort. The sledge slides forward onto the platform with a soft, final hiss, and the crew leader gives the call to stop, a single, long note that fades into the hot air. You release the rope and stand upright, your chest heaving, your skin slick with sweat, your muscles trembling with the memory of the long climb, and you look around at the upper platform with the dazed, quiet satisfaction of a task completed, a block delivered, a journey finished. The upper platform is a wide, flat expanse of leveled stone that extends from the lip of the ramp to the base of the unfinished tomb structure, and as you step onto it, the first thing you notice is how the quality of the light changes, becoming harsher and more reflective as it bounces off the pale limestone paving that has been polished smooth by months of dragging sledges and scuffing sandals. The block you helped haul sits on its sledge near the edge of the platform, its ochre mark now aligned with a series of similar marks painted on the paving stones, a guide path that leads from the ramp toward a dark rectangular opening in the side of the tomb, and you stand for a moment with your hands resting on your hips, breathing deeply, feeling the sweat cool on your forehead and the back of your neck as a faint breeze moves across the elevated platform. The other haulers are dispersing, some heading back down the ramp to fetch another block, others finding patches of shade against the scaffolding, and the crew leader nods to you once, a brief acknowledgement that says the job is done and you are free to move on to whatever task comes next. You walk away from the sledge and toward the tomb entrance, your sandals making soft, flat sounds on the hot stone, and with each step the glare of the open platform begins to recede, replaced by a growing shadow that spills from the doorway like cool water pouring from a dark vessel. The entrance is a simple rectangle cut into the massive limestone blocks of the outer wall, its edges sharp and clean, its lintel a single enormous stone that casts a band of deep shade across the threshold, and as you cross into that shade the temperature drops so suddenly and so completely that it feels as though you have stepped from one season into another, the dry heat of the desert replaced by a coolness that is still heavy and slightly damp against your skin. The linen of your kilt, which had been hot and clinging, now feels cooler and looser, and the sweat on your arms dries quickly into a fine, salty film. The passage beyond the entrance is a short corridor that slopes very gently downward, its walls made of the same pale limestone, but here the stone has not been polished by the sun and the wind. It retains the rough chisel marks of the workers who cut it, parallel grooves that run diagonally across each block, in patterns that catch the dim light and throw tiny wavering shadows. The floor underfoot is covered with a thin layer of fine white dust that muffles your footsteps, so that you walk in a kind of soft near silence. The only sound the faint scrape of your sandals and the distant echoing tap of a mallet from somewhere deeper inside the structure. The air smells of dry stone dust, a clean mineral scent that fills your nose and throat, and beneath that there is another smell, richer and warmer, the scent of cedar resin from the scaffolding timbers that have been used inside the chamber. A smell that reminds you of the workshops where the carpenters steam planks into curves, and the air is thick with the sweetness of heated wood. The corridor opens into the burial chamber itself, and you stop just inside the doorway to let your eyes adjust to the dimness. For the light here comes not from the sun, but from a small number of oil lamps set in niches along the walls, their flames steady and golden and very small, each one a tiny teardrop of fire that casts a soft, wavering circle of light around itself and leaves the rest of the chamber in deep, velvety shadow. The chamber is a rectangular space, its walls rising straight and smooth to a flat ceiling of enormous stone beams, and the proportions of the room are such that it feels both vast and intimate, the ceiling high enough to swallow sound and the walls close enough to make every small noise distinct and near. The floor is covered with more of that fine white dust, tracked in by many feet, and in the center of the chamber a low wooden scaffolding has been erected, its cedar poles lashed together with palm fiber rope, its platforms holding tools and water jars, and the small clay lamps that provide the only illumination. Your eyes slowly discern the details of the walls, and you see that they are covered with the beginnings of carved reliefs, outlines of figures and hieroglyphs that have been sketched in red ochre and partially cut into the stone, the work of the masons who have been laboring in this chamber for many weeks. The chisel marks are fine and precise here, much finer than the rough cuts in the quarry, and the half-finished figures seem to hover on the edge of visibility, their shapes emerging from the pale stone as if they are slowly waking from a long sleep. The sound of your own breathing seems louder in this space, softened by the dust and the stone, but also somehow magnified, as if the chamber itself is listening, and the distant tapping of the mason's mallets echoes with a soft, resonant quality that lingers in the air after each strike. A mason approaches you from the far end of the chamber, his figure resolving out of the dimness as he walks through the pools of lamplight and shadow, his kilt pale against his dark skin, his hands white with dust up to the wrists. He is a man you have seen before, a quiet, patient worker whose specialty is the final positioning of the blocks inside the tomb, and he gestures toward the doorway where another block, similar to the one you helped haul, is waiting on a small wooden sledge just inside the entrance. This block is destined for a gap in the wall near the far corner, where the course of stone is still incomplete, and your task now is to help guide it into place, using the copper levers that lean against the wall like tall, thin walking sticks. You walk with the mason to the waiting block, and together you examine the gap in the wall where it will sit, a rectangular space that has been prepared with a bed of fine, dry sand to allow the block to be adjusted easily before it settles into its final position. The mason kneels and runs his hand over the sand, smoothing it with a gentle circular motion, checking that it is level and free of any pebbles or debris, and you watch the lamplight flicker over his bent back, the shadows shifting on the wall behind him. The block itself is perhaps the length of your arm and half as wide, a manageable size for two workers to handle with levers, and its faces have been smoothed to a soft, even finish that feels almost warm to the touch despite the coolness of the chamber. The mason picks up one of the copper levers, a long, slender bar with a flattened, slightly curved end, and he inserts the tip under one edge of the block while you take the other lever and do the same on the opposite side. The levers are heavy but well balanced, their copper surfaces worn to a dull, dark patina, and the grips have been wrapped with leather thongs that are soft and slightly tacky against your palms. You lean your weight onto the lever, and the block tilts up just slightly, a tiny movement that breaks its contact with the sledge and allows the mason to slide a small wooden roller underneath. The roller is a smooth, round pole of acacia wood, one of several that are stacked near the wall, and it makes a soft, dry sound as it rolls into place, a sound like a stick dragged lightly over packed sand. The process of moving the block across the chamber floor is slow and methodical, a series of tiny, incremental advances that require only patience and a gentle, steady pressure. You and the mason work in a rhythm that does not need words, a shared understanding of weight and balance and the way the stone responds to the levers. When you tilt the block upward, he slides a roller beneath, and when he tilts from his side, you adjust the position of the rollers to keep the block moving straight toward the gap in the wall. The stone is heavy, and the levers amplify your strength so that the block shifts and rocks with a ponderous, almost liquid motion, like a boat settling into water, and the only sounds are the soft grunt of effort, the scrape of copper against limestone, the dry rumble of the wooden rollers turning over the dusty floor. The lamplight flickers as a draft moves through the chamber, a faint current of air that comes from the entrance and stirs the flames so that the shadows on the walls sway and dance, and for a moment the carved figures seem to move, their half-finished limbs shifting as if they are trying to step out of the stone. The draught carries with it a faint breath of the outside world, a hint of heat and dust, but it vanishes quickly, swallowed by the cool, dense air of the tomb, and the lamps steady themselves once more, their flames burning straight and still. The smell of the cedar resin is stronger now, a warm, sweet scent that seems to coat the inside of your nose, and you notice that the scaffolding timbers are dark with it, their surfaces sticky and glistening where the resin has oozed out in the heat of the day and then cooled again in the shade. As the block inches closer to the gap, the mason leaves his lever for a moment and kneels beside the wall, checking the alignment with a plumb line made of a small stone weight tied to a length of flax cord. He holds the cord up and lets the weight hang free, its shadow a thin dark stripe against the pale stone, and he watches the way the gap lines up with the block's edge, his eyes narrowed, his head tilted slightly to one side. The everyday Schmidt is very small, no more than the width of a fingernail, and he communicates this to you not with words but with a gesture of his hand, a slight pushing motion toward the left. You lean on the lever again and shift the block a fraction, and the plumb line swings gently and then settles, and the mason nods once, a slow, satisfied dip of his chin. Now the block is positioned exactly over the sand bed, and the final stage of the work begins, the careful, slow lowering of the stone into its permanent place. You and the mason remove the rollers one by one, sliding them out from under the block with careful, even movements, so that the stone settles gradually, without any sudden drops or shifts. The sand beneath crunches softly as it compresses under the weight, a sound like footsteps on dry ground, and the block sinks down in tiny increments, its bottom face meeting the sand, its top face aligning with the top of the adjacent blocks so that the joint between them is a hairline crack, almost invisible. The mason runs his thumb along the joint, feeling for any unevenness, and then he takes up a small handful of fine gypsum powder from a leather pouch and works it into the crack with a gentle, circular motion, sealing the gap so smoothly that when he is finished, the wall looks as if it was always whole, always complete. You step back and look at the block now resting in the wall, and it is impossible to tell that it was ever a separate piece of stone. It has become part of the tomb, part of the vast, silent structure that will stand here long after you and the mason and everyone you know have turned to dust. The thought is not sad or profound. It is simply a quiet observation that drifts through your mind and then passes, like the draught that stirred the lamps, and you find yourself looking instead at the chisel marks on the wall beside the new block, the fine, shallow grooves that the mason will fill tomorrow with more of the carved figures, continuing the slow, patient work of turning bare walls into something that will speak across the ages. The mason picks up the copper levers and returns them to their place against the wall, and he pauses to adjust the wick of one of the oil lamps, trimming the charred end with a small bronze knife so that the flame burns brighter and cleaner. The light flares for a moment and then settles, and in that brief brightness you see the full extent of the chamber's decorations, the long processions of figures that stretch from floor to ceiling, the rows of hieroglyphs that march across the walls in neat, orderly lines, the half-finished face of a god that looks out from the stone with calm, empty eyes. Then the light dims again, and the figures retreat into shadow, and the chamber returns to its quiet, patient darkness. You walk back toward the entrance, your footsteps soft on the dusty floor, and as you near the corridor, the air begins to warm again, the coolness of the tomb giving way to the dry heat of the afternoon that waits just beyond the doorway. The light at the end of the corridor is a bright, golden rectangle, and stepping into it feels like emerging from a dream, the sun washing over you in a wave of warmth and brilliance that makes you blink and raise a hand to shield your eyes. The upper platform is still busy, the workers still moving, the ramp still carrying its slow procession of sledges and stones, and the sounds of the open air are louder and sharper than the muffled echoes of the chamber, a reminder that the world outside has continued without you, steady and unchanged. You find a patch of shade against the outer wall of the tomb, where the stone is still cool from the night, and you sit down with your back to the massive blocks, feeling the solidness of them, the way they do not shift or give at all. Your water skin is nearly empty, but you take a small sip, savoring the last of the warmth, and you close your eyes and let the memory of the dim chamber settle around you. The smell of the cedar resin, the flicker of the lamplight, the slow, careful dance of the levers and the rollers, and the stone finding its final resting place. The heat of the afternoon feels distant now, a memory just like the chamber, and you rest in the shade while the sun continues its slow arc toward the western horizon, unhurried and calm. The corner of the tomb chamber where you settle yourself is the same corner where the new block was fitted into the wall only a short while ago, and the stone still carries a faint residue of coolness from its long sleep in the earth, a coolness that seeps through the woven mat you have placed on the packed floor and rises up into your lower back. The lamp that the mason left burning in its niche has been joined by a second lamp, and together they cast a pool of soft golden light that washes over the section of wall directly in front of you, illuminating the ochre outlines that have been drawn there and leaving the rest of the chamber in a darkness that feels less like an absence of light and more like a presence of shadow, a thick, velvety substance that fills the corners and the high ceiling and waits patiently at the edges of your vision. You have chosen your tools for this task with the same quiet deliberation that you use every time you sit down to carve, and they lie now on a piece of clean linen spread beside your right knee. 3 copper chisels of different widths, their blades gleaming faintly in the lamplight, a small wooden mallet with a head no larger than a child's fist, a smooth river stone that fits neatly into the palm of your hand, a leather pouch of fine abrasive sand, and a soft brush made from the tail hairs of a donkey, its bristles for the place for any liver frat. Each tool has its purpose, and you know them all by the way they feel in your hand, the weight of the mallet, the cold, sharp edge of the narrowest chisel, the silky smoothness of the river stone that you found years ago on the bank of the canal and have used ever since for polishing the final surfaces of your work. The wall panel you are to carve has been marked out already by the master draftsman, whose job it is to move through the tomb chambers with a pot of red ochre and a fine reed brush, laying down the guidelines that the carvers will follow. His lines are thin and confident, a network of curves and straight edges that depict a scene of offerings, a row of figures carrying baskets of bread and jars of oil, their bodies in profile, their arms extended, their heads crowned with simple wigs, and in front of them, a larger figure, perhaps a god or a noble ancestor, seated on a low throne with a staff in one hand and the Ankh symbol in the other. The hieroglyphs that accompany the scene have been sketched in as well. Small, precise squares of text that will record the words of the offering formula, and the whole composition has a quiet, orderly balance that pleases the eye even in its unfinished state. A promise of what it will become when the carving is complete. You take up the finest chisel first, the one with a blade no wider than the tip of your little finger, and you fit it into your right hand, with the handle resting against the soft pad of your palm and the blade pinched lightly between your thumb and forefinger. The copper is cool to the touch, and the leather binding on the handle is dark with the oil of countless hours of use, softened to a texture that molds itself to the contours of your grip, and you take a moment to adjust the angle of the blade against the ochre line, tilting it very slightly so that the cutting edge will bite into the stone at the precise angle that produces the cleanest groove. This is a moment that requires no hurry, a small pause before the beginning of the work that is itself a part of the work, a settling of the mind and the hand into a shared focus. The first tap of the mallet against the head of the chisel is so light that it makes almost no sound, a tiny click that is swallowed immediately by the dense, still air of the chamber, and the chisel blade sinks into the limestone by no more than the thickness of a hair. You lift the mallet and let it fall again, the same gentle weight, the same tiny advance, and then again, and the rhythm establishes itself with the quiet inevitability of a heartbeat, a series of soft, precise taps that blend together into a continuous, whispery sound like the scratching of a bird's claw on a stone sill. Your left hand steadies the chisel, the thumb guiding the blade along the ochre line, and your right hand wields the mallet with a motion that has become so automatic over the years that you no longer think about it. A small circular swing that originates in the wrist and uses the weight of the mallet head rather than the strength of your arm to do the work. The ochre line you are following traces the curve of a figure's shoulder, a smooth, sweeping arc that runs from the base of the neck to the upper arm, and you work your way along it with a patience that cannot be hurried, because the stone will not be hurried. Each tap of the mallet deepens the groove by a fraction, and the white dust that rises from the cut is so fine that it hangs in the air like a tiny suspended cloud before drifting down to settle on the linen mat and the back of your hand and the folds of your kilt. You pause after every few taps to blow gently on the groove, clearing away the loose dust so that you can see the line clearly, and the dust swirls up in a soft pale puff and then disperses, revealing the dark, sharp line of the cut against the creamy white of the limestone. The figure under your chisel begins to emerge from the stone in a way that is so gradual it is almost imperceptible, a slow revelation of shape and form that happens at the pace of growing things, the pace of a seed pushing up through soil or a snail crossing a garden path. The curve of the shoulder becomes a depression, a shallow valley in the flat surface of the wall, and the ochre line that guided your chisel is slowly replaced by the shadow that the groove casts, a dark, sharp line of its own that shows you where the edge of the figure will be. You work your way down from the shoulder to the upper arm, and then from the arm to the elbow, and each section of the line is identical to the one before it. In every way that matters, a continuous, unbroken flow of small, precise actions that add up to a single, large action. The slow cutting of a figure out of the living rock. The sound of your mallet and chisel joins the sounds of the other carvers who are working in the same chamber, though you cannot see them because they are hidden by the shadows and the scaffolding, and the combined sound of all those small rhythmic taps fills the space with a soft, rustling music that is as calming as the sound of wind through dry reeds. The taps overlap and separate and overlap again in a pattern that is never quite the same from one moment to the next, and beneath that pattern there is the occasional creak of the scaffolding as the cedar timbers settle, the faint sputter of an oil lamp as the flame consumes a speck of impurity in the wick, the distant, muffled thud of a heavy block being moved somewhere on the upper platform far above. These sounds are the background of your work, the texture against which the fine, detailed labor of carving takes place, and they sink into your awareness without demanding attention, a quiet, constant presence like the sound of your own breathing. You complete the outline of the first figure and set down the fine chisel, flexing your fingers to loosen the slight stiffness that has settled into the joints, and you take up the broader chisel, the one with a blade as wide as your thumb. This chisel is for clearing away the background stone around the figure, cutting away the limestone in shallow, flat layers so that the figure will stand out in low relief. Its shapes raise slightly above the surrounding surface. The technique is different from the outlining, requiring a flatter angle of the blade and a slightly heavier tap of the mallet, and you adjust your grip accordingly, moving your thumb further down the handle and shifting the angle of your wrist so that the chisel will bite into the stone at a shallow, skimming depth. The background clearing is a slower, more meditative task than the outlining because there is no single line to follow, only a broad area of stone that must be reduced by a uniform amount. You work in small overlapping passes, the chisel peeling away thin flakes of limestone that curl up and fall away like shavings of dried clay, and the sound of the cutting changes to a lower, scratchier note, a steady, rasping sound that is as monotonous and soothing as the sound of a grinding stone. The dust that rises from this work is coarser, heavier, and it falls more quickly, building up in a fine white drift along the base of the wall and coating your forearms with a pale layer that cracks slightly when you move. Time in the chamber is measured only by the deepening of the carving and the slow, steady consumption of the oil in the lamps, and you have no way of knowing how long you have been working, nor do you need to know. The sun outside has certainly moved, sliding down the western sky, and the shadows on the upper platform will have lengthened, and the heat of the afternoon will have begun its slow, gradual decline toward the coolness of evening. But here in the tomb there is no sun and no shadow and no heat, only the constant dim light of the lamps and the cool, still air and the endless, patient work of the chisel against the stone. Your body has settled into the posture of carving so deeply that it feels as natural as standing or walking. Your back straight, your shoulders relaxed, your head tilted slightly to one side to bring the carving surface into the best angle of the lamplight, and you move through the task with a calm, unhurried focus that asks nothing of you except your presence. The background clearing around the first figure is finished, and you set down the broad chisel and take up the donkey hair brush, sweeping it gently across the carved surface to clear away the accumulated dust, the soft bristles tickling the stone with a faint, whispering sound that is different from any of the other sounds in the chamber, a delicate, papery rustle that seems to belong more to the world of living things than to the world of stone and metal. The dust lifts away in a fine, pale cloud, and the figure stands revealed for the first time, a raised shape of pale limestone that seems to glow faintly in the lamplight, its contours soft and slightly rounded, its form still rough but already carrying the quiet dignity of the finished relief. Now you take up the river stone, the smooth, dark grey oval that fits into your palm as comfortably as if it had been shaped for that purpose alone, and you begin the slow work of polishing the carved surface. You rub the stone in small circular motions over the raised figure, pressing with a gentle, even pressure that wears away the microscopic roughness left by the chisel, and the surface of the limestone begins to change under your hand, growing smoother and slightly glossier, the pale cream color deepening to a warm, buttery tone. The river stone makes a soft, grating sound as it moves, a sound like sand being poured very slowly from one hand to another, and the vibration of the grinding travels up through your wrist and into your forearm, a pleasant, tingling sensation that is both soothing and alerting. You work the river stone over every part of the carved figure, the curve of the shoulder, the length of the arm, the delicate shape of the hand that will hold a basket of offerings, and with each pass the surface becomes a little smoother, a little more finished until it has the texture of hardened silk, a surface that catches the lamplight and reflects it back in a soft, diffuse glow. The polishing is the final stage of the carving, the moment when the figure stops being a rough shape cut from the wall and becomes something else, something that will endure, and you take your time with it, moving the stone in slow overlapping circles, pausing frequently to blow away the fine dust and check the surface with the tip of your finger, feeling for any roughness that might remain. When the first figure is finished, you sit back and look at it for a long moment, not with pride exactly, but with a quiet, satisfied acknowledgement that the task has been done and done well. The figure is simple, a man in profile with a short wig and a knee-length kilt, his arms extended to hold an offering that has not yet been carved. And his face is calm and expressionless, the face of someone who exists outside of time and emotion, a face that will look out from this wall for thousands of years without ever changing. You have carved this same figure many times before, in many different tombs, and each time it is the same figure, and yet slightly different, because the stone is always different, the light is always different, and your hand is always a day older than it was the last time. The oil in the nearest lamp is beginning to run low, the flame flickering and shrinking as the wick drinks up the last of the fuel, and you reach over and tilt the lamp carefully, letting the remaining oil pool around the wick so that the flame steadies and brightens again. The movement is so familiar that you do it without looking, your fingers finding the small clay handle of the lamp by touch, and the brief flaring of the light casts a quick, dancing shadow across the wall that seems to make the carved figures move, a momentary illusion of life that passes as soon as the flame settles back into its steady, golden glow. You pick up the fine chisel again and turn your attention to the next figure in the row, a woman carrying a jar of oil on her head, her body slender and graceful, her outline already traced in red ochre against the pale stone. The chisel finds the line, the mallet taps, the dust rises, and the rhythm begins again, as steady and calming as it was at the start, a rhythm that will continue until the panel is complete, and the chamber is finished, and the tomb is sealed, and the long, slow passage of the centuries begins. You do not think about the centuries. You think only about the line in front of you, the feel of the chisel in your hand, the tiny, precise movement of the blade through the stone, and these small immediate things are enough to fill the present moment completely, leaving no room for anything else. The quiet of the chamber wraps around you like a blanket, and the lamplight pools golden on the wall, and your hand moves through the motions of the carving with the same easy, automatic grace that your feet move through the steps of the morning walk, the same deep, bodily knowing that asks nothing of your mind except to be present and to watch. The offering bearers will take shape under your chisel, one by one, and the hieroglyphs will be cut into their neat rows, and the polished stone will gleam softly in the lamplight, and then you will stand up and stretch and walk back out into the evening air, leaving the chamber behind you to its quiet, patient darkness. The light outside the tomb entrance has changed while you were inside the chamber, and you notice this change before you fully step out of the shadows, a shift in the quality of the brightness that spills through the doorway and falls across the dusty floor of the corridor. The white hammering glare of the afternoon has softened into something warmer and more golden, a light that seems to have weight and texture, and as you emerge from the entrance and straighten your back, blinking against the sudden openness of the sky, you see that the sun has dropped low enough to brush the top of the western cliffs, its disk no longer a fierce, invisible point of fire, but a great orange sphere that you could look at for a moment without pain, its edges slightly blurred by the heat haze that still rises from the desert floor. The upper platform, which was busy and loud when you left it, has grown quieter in the intervening hours, the sledges and the haulers and the masons all moving with a slower, more deliberate rhythm that speaks of the day's work winding down. The shadows of the scaffolding and the stacked blocks stretch long and thin across the pale paving stones, pointing eastward like dark fingers, and the air, while still warm, carries the first faint hint of the coolness that will arrive with the dusk. You feel that coolness as a gentle touch on the skin of your face and your forearms, a promise of relief that makes the remaining heat easier to bear, and you stand for a moment near the edge of the platform, looking out over the plain below and letting your eyes adjust to the open space after the close, dim confines of the chamber. The overseer's signal comes not as a horn this time, but as a series of calls passed from worker to worker, a chain of voices that begins somewhere near the ramp and ripples outward through the camp and the quarry and the upper works, a simple, wordless message that means the day's labor is done and the time for rest has arrived. The sound of these calls is like the sound of birds settling for the evening, a gradual, spreading quiet that replaces the steady hum of activity with a softer, more scattered pattern of noise, the clink of tools being gathered, the thud of wooden mallets being dropped into baskets, the low murmur of voices exchanging brief observations about the work and the weather and the meal to come. You join the slow procession of workers who are making their way from the upper platform down toward the camp, and the path you take is the same ramp that you climbed earlier with the sledge. But the experience of walking down it is entirely different from the experience of hauling up. Where the ascent was a long, straining pull against the weight of the stone and the angle of the slope, the descent is a release, a giving in to gravity that requires only that you place one foot in front of the other and let your body carry itself downward. Your legs, which burned with effort on the way up, now feel loose and relaxed, the muscles warm and slightly tired, but no longer demanding anything of you, and each step down the ramp sends a small, pleasant jolt through your knees and your hips, a sensation that is more like a stretch than an impact. The ramp is quieter now than it was during the hauling. The sledges all parked at the top or the bottom, the mud tracks drying in the evening air and beginning to crack at the edges, their dark, wet color fading to a pale gray. The rubble walls that flank the ramp still radiate the stored heat of the day, and you can feel that warmth against your arm when you walk close to them, a dry, dusty heat that smells of sun-baked earth and crumbled limestone. The view from the ramp as you descend is a wide, sweeping panorama of the plain below, and you watch the camp resolve itself from a pattern of small, indistinct shapes into the familiar arrangement of awnings and storage sheds and cook fires, the smoke from those fires now rising straight up into the still air, its color a soft pale gray against the deepening blue of the sky. At the foot of the ramp, where the staging area levels out into the packed earth of the camp, you step off the incline and feel the immediate difference under your sandals, the ground now flat and solid and reassuring after the long sloping descent. The relief of stepping onto level ground is a small physical pleasure that spreads upward through your ankles and your shins and settles into a general sense of ease, and you pause for a moment to roll your shoulders and stretch your arms above your head, feeling the pull of the day's labor in your muscles, a deep, pleasant ache that is the body's way of telling you that you have worked well and that rest will be sweet. The camp is transforming itself from a place of work into a place of evening rest, and you can see this transformation happening all around you as the workers return from their various tasks and begin the small, personal rituals of the end of the day. Some are washing the dust from their hands and faces at the large water jars that have been set out near the central awning, splashing the cool water over their heads and letting it run down their necks and shoulders, the droplets catching the low golden light and sparkling for an instant before they soak into the dry ground. Others are rolling out woven reed mats in the shade of the acacia trees, claiming their spots for the night, while still others are tending the cook fires, adding sticks of dry brush and blowing gently on the coals until the flames leap up with a soft, crackling sound that is as much a part of the evening as the color of the sky. You make your way to the washing area and wait your turn at the water jar, and when you reach it, you cup your hands and lift the cool water to your face, splashing it over your cheeks and your forehead and the bridge of your nose, feeling the dust and the salt dissolve and run away in thin, muddy rivulets that drip from your chin onto your chest. You scrub your forearms with a handful of fine sand, working it into the skin to lift away the stubborn white film of limestone dust, and then you rinse the sand away with more water, watching your skin emerge clean and dark and smooth. The water jar is nearly empty by the time you finish, and one of the assistants tilts it onto its side and pours the last of the water into a smaller bowl, which he will carry down to the canal to refill before the night is over, and you nod to him in acknowledgement. A small, wordless exchange that is all the thanks that is needed. The cook fires have been burning long enough now that the large clay pots set among the coals are beginning to send up thin wisps of steam, and the smell that rises from them is the smell of the evening meal, a rich, earthy scent of stewed beans and onions, and the faint, nutty aroma of the emmer wheat that has been simmering slowly all afternoon. The smell reaches you where you stand, and it wakes up a hunger that you had not noticed during the long hours of work, a deep bodily hunger that makes your stomach tighten and your mouth fill with saliva. And you follow that smell toward the communal eating area, where the workers are already gathering, their faces lit by the warm glow of the fires. The eating area is a wide, open space near the center of the camp, its ground packed smooth by many feet and its edges marked by low stone benches that have been worn into comfortable, curved shapes by generations of seated workers. The clay pots have been lifted from the fires and set on flat stones, their contents bubbling gently, their steam rising in soft white clouds that catch the firelight and glow with a rosy golden color. Workers line up with their personal bowls, simple vessels of fired clay, each one different in shape and color, some with small chips in the rim or a pattern of lines scratched into the side, and the cook ladles the stew into each bowl with a steady, unhurried hand, filling it to just below the rim so that nothing spills. You take your bowl and find a place on one of the stone benches, sitting with your back against a stack of timber poles that still hold a faint warmth from the sun, and you hold the bowl in both hands, letting the heat of the stew soak through the clay and into your palms, a comforting warmth that spreads up your wrists and into your forearms. The stew is thick and dark, a mixture of fava beans that have been cooked until they are soft enough to crush with the tongue, onions that have caramelized into a sweet golden tangle, and a broth that is rich with the taste of the earth and the fire, seasoned with salt and a hint of cumin, and the faint green bitterness of wild herbs. You lift the bowl to your lips and take the first sip of the broth, and the taste is so good, so simple and nourishing, that you close your eyes for a moment and simply let the warmth of it spread through your chest. A flatbread is passed around, the same round, dense bread that you ate in the dark of the morning, but now it is warm and slightly charred at the edges from being held over the coals for a few moments, and you tear off a piece and dip it into the stew, watching the bread soak up the dark liquid and soften. The chew of the bread is satisfying, a combination of the slight resistance of the crust and the yielding softness of the inside, and the taste of the wheat blends with the taste of the beans and the onions into a single, harmonious flavor that needs no improvement or addition. You eat slowly, as do all the workers around you, because the meal is not just about filling the stomach, but about resting the body and the mind, about sitting in the quiet company of others and letting the day settle into memory. The conversations around the cook fires are low and easy, fragments of talk that drift across the eating area, like the sparks that rise from the flames and vanish into the darkening sky. Someone mentions that the moon will be nearly full tonight, a good moon for walking home by, and someone else replies that the canal level has dropped a little and the farmers are worried about the next irrigation. An older worker tells a brief, quiet story about a cat that wandered into the quarry once and caught a mouse right on top of a half-finished block, and the story is greeted with soft chuckles and a moment of comfortable silence. No one speaks of politics or power or the great meaning of the tomb they are building. They speak of water and animals, and the small, ordinary details of their days, and these words settle over the group like the smoke from the fires, a gentle, unremarkable presence that binds everyone together. You finish the stew and use the last piece of bread to wipe the inside of the bowl clean, and then you walk to the water jar to rinse the bowl and your hands, the cool water washing away the last traces of the meal and leaving your skin feeling clean and tight. The sky above the camp has deepened now, from gold to a soft, dusty rose, and the first wash of violet is spreading upward from the eastern horizon, a color so delicate and fleeting that it seems to exist only for a moment, a transition between the day and the night that cannot be held or fixed. The clouds, which were invisible during the heat of the afternoon, have appeared as thin, feathery streaks high in the west, and they catch the last light of the vanished sun and glow with a vivid, fiery orange that fades even as you watch, dimming from orange to coral to a soft, dusty pink. You stand with your clean bowl in your hands and your face turned toward the west, and you watch the colors move through their slow, silent progression, the orange giving way to rose, the rose deepening to violet, the violet spreading across the whole dome of the sky until it is the only color left, a deep, luminous purple that seems to hold the last memory of the light. The first stars have appeared in the east, tiny cold points of white that flicker and steady themselves as the darkness gathers, and you can see the evening star, brighter than all the others, hanging low above the horizon like a single, perfect drop of molten silver. The air has cooled significantly now, and you feel a slight chill on your bare arms, a chill that is not unpleasant but refreshing, a sign that the night is arriving in full. The camp settles into its evening quiet, with the same slow, natural rhythm that has marked every transition of the day, the workers finishing their meals, washing their bowls, and drifting toward their sleeping spots. The cook fires are allowed to burn down, their flames shrinking to a bed of glowing coals that pulse with a soft red light, and the smell of the smoke changes from the sharp, acrid scent of burning brush to the sweeter, heavier scent of smoldering embers. The sounds of the camp grow softer and more sporadic, a single voice calling a good night, the distant bark of a dog from somewhere beyond the storage sheds, the rustle of a reed mat being unrolled, and then the quiet settles in, a deep, contented quiet that is not an absence of sound, but a presence of peace. You find your own sleeping spot near the sycamore fig tree where you sat in the morning, and you spread out a reed mat on the ground, the same mat that you carried with you from home, its surface worn smooth in the places where your body rests. You lie down on your back and look up at the sky, and the stars are now out in their full, staggering number, a dense field of light that stretches from horizon to horizon, the great river of the Milky Way, a pale, glowing band that cuts the sky in two. The branches of the sycamore tree make a dark, intricate pattern against the stars, and a very faint breeze stirs the leaves, making a soft, dry rustling sound that is one of the most soothing sounds in the world. You think, without really thinking, about the day that has passed, the quarry and the ramp and the chamber, the feel of the chisel in your hand and the weight of the rope on your shoulder, the taste of the stew and the coolness of the water, and all these memories blend together into a single quiet sense of completeness, a feeling that the day has been lived fully and well, and that nothing more is required. The tiredness in your body is a deep, comfortable tiredness, and you let it pull you down toward sleep with the same gentle gravity that pulled you down the ramp, a slow, easy surrender that asks nothing of you except to close your eyes and let go. The camp around you is now almost completely still, the fires reduced to embers, the voice is gone, the only movement the occasional shift of a sleeping worker turning on a mat, and the quiet is so deep that you can hear the sound of your own heartbeat and the slow, steady rhythm of your breath. The sycamore leaves rustle once more and then fall silent, and the stars continue their slow, imperceptible march across the sky, and you lie in the darkness at the edge of sleep, feeling the cool air on your face and the solid earth beneath your mat, and you are at peace. The embers of the cook fires have faded to a faint, pulsing orange, a glow so dim that it barely reaches beyond the ring of stones that contains it, and the camp around you is now a landscape of soft shadows and quiet breathing. You rise from your reed mat slowly, your body heavy with the pleasant tiredness of the long day, and you stand for a moment in the darkness, feeling the cool air move across your skin and the solid ground beneath your sandals. The sycamore fig tree is a dark shape against the stars, its leaves hanging still, and the water jars near the central awning gleam faintly in the starlight, their clay surfaces holding a pale, ghostly sheen that seems to come from within rather than from above. Other workers are rising too, dark figures emerging from their mats and gathering their few belongings, and the camp stirs with the soft, shuffling sounds of departure, the rustle of linen, the clink of a waterskin being lifted, the low murmur of a quiet good night. No horn sounds for this leaving, for the end of the day requires no signal. Each person knows when it is time to go, and the knowledge is carried in the angle of the stars and the deep, settled quiet of the body. You pick up your own waterskin, now empty and light, and you fold your reed mat under your arm, feeling the familiar texture of the dried stalks against your skin, and you turn toward the path that leads away from the camp, toward the village and the river and the small mud brick house where you will sleep. The path stretches before you as a pale, winding ribbon of packed earth, its surface clearly visible in the starlight, for the stars tonight are so many and so bright that they cast a faint, silvery illumination over the whole landscape. The moon, now a few days past its first quarter, hangs above the eastern horizon like a glowing bowl of pale gold, its light strong enough to throw soft shadows that blur at the edges and shift slowly as the moon climbs higher. The combined light of the moon and the stars turns the desert, from a place of harsh white glare into a place of gentle, muted tones. The pale ground silver grey, the dark scrub a deep charcoal, the distant cliffs a soft shadowed blue that seems to recede into the sky. You walk away from the camp and feel the ground change under your sandals, from the hard-packed earth of the central area to the slightly looser, sandier surface of the outer path, and with each step, the sounds of the camp grow fainter behind you. The low murmur of voices and the crackle of dying embers giving way to the deeper, wider quiet of the open desert at night. The air is cool now, much cooler than it was even an hour ago, and it carries the scent of the dry earth and the faint, clean smell of the distant river, a smell that is more a memory than a presence, a hint of moisture and green things that drifts across the miles of sand and rock and settles softly in your senses. You pass the storage shelters at the edge of the camp, their reed roofs pale under the moon, and you see the rows of squared blocks waiting silently, their surfaces catching the starlight and throwing it back in a faint, diffuse glow. The blocks seem different at night, less like objects of labor and more like sleeping creatures, their sharp edges softened by the darkness, their weight and solidity, a quiet, reassuring presence that asks nothing and expects nothing. You run your hand over one block as you pass, and the stone is cool to the touch, completely cool, as if the heat of the day had never happened, and the surface is so smooth that it feels like touching still water. Beyond the storage area, the path begins its gentle descent from the plateau toward the floodplain, and you leave the last of the camp structures behind, stepping out into the open landscape where the only shapes are the scattered acacia trees and the low, rolling contours of the desert. The quiet here is different from the quiet of the camp, deeper and more complete, a silence that seems to have been waiting for you, and the only sound is the soft crunch of your sandals on the path, and the occasional dry rustle of a thornbush stirred by a faint breath of wind. You walk alone now, the other workers having spread out along the path or taken slightly different routes toward their own villages, and the solitude is not lonely but spacious, a comfortable emptiness that lets your mind expand outward into the night. The stars are the great presence of the walk, and you find yourself looking up at them more and more as the path carries you away from the last traces of the camp's light, your eyes drawn to the vast, glittering dome that arches over the world. The sky is perfectly clear, not a single cloud to obscure the view, and the stars are so dense in places that they seem to merge into a continuous shimmering mist, a dust of light that hangs suspended in the darkness. The Milky Way is a bright, irregular band that cuts across the sky from north to south, its edges soft and diffuse, its center thick with clusters of stars that look like tiny scattered diamonds, and you trace its course with your eyes as you walk, following it from the horizon all the way to the zenith and down again to the opposite horizon. You know the names of some of the stars, the bright ones that the old priests used to mark the seasons and the hours of the night, and you find them now as you walk, the familiar patterns that have watched over this land since before there were villages or tombs or workers to build them. There is the star that stands above the northern horizon, the one that never moves, a fixed point around which all the other stars slowly turn. There is the constellation that looks like a great bird with outstretched wings, its body marked by 3 bright stars in a row. There is the reddish star near the eastern horizon, a steady, unwinking point of warm light that the priests say is the eye of a god looking down upon the earth. You do not think about the priests or the gods in any deep or solemn way. You simply note the stars as you would note the shape of a familiar hill or the bend of a well-known path. A part of the landscape that is always there, a quiet, constant companion. The path descends from the rocky slopes onto the level ground of the floodplain, and here the character of the night changes again, the harsh mineral scent of the desert giving way to the richer, damper smell of the cultivated fields. You can smell the river now, not just a faint hint, but a real, present odor of water and wet mud and the green, growing scent of the barley and the clover. And this smell is so familiar, so deeply associated with home and rest, that it seems to ease something inside you, a tension you did not know you were holding. The fields on either side of the path are dark, their crops reduced to a texture of soft, rustling shadows, and the irrigation canals that run between them reflect the starlight in long, straight lines of silver that seem to float just above the ground. You hear the river before you see it, a low, continuous murmur that grows steadily louder as you walk, a sound that is not so much a noise as a presence, a deep, rhythmic pulse that underlies all the other sounds of the night. The river is wide and slow-moving at this time of year, its waters dark and smooth, and when you reach the bank and look out across its surface, you see the stars reflected there, a perfect inverted mirror of the sky that shimmers and breaks and reforms as the current moves. The river smells of mud and fish and the clean, cold freshness of water that has traveled a very long way, and you stop for a moment on the bank, crouching down to dip your fingers into the flow, feeling the cool liquid wrap around your skin and tug gently at your hand. The water is cooler than the air, and the sensation is a small, quiet pleasure that you allow yourself to enjoy fully, without hurry, before you stand up and continue on your way. The path now follows the river for a short distance, running along the top of the low embankment that keeps the floodwaters from the fields, and you can see the lights of the village ahead, tiny flickering points of orange that mark the doorways of houses where the evening fires are still burning. The village is a cluster of low, dark shapes huddled against the pale ground, its mud brick walls indistinguishable from the earth they are made from, its roofs flat and still, and the sound of a dog barking reaches you, a single distant note that hangs in the air and then fades, leaving the quiet deeper than before. The dog knows your footsteps, as it knows the footsteps of everyone who lives in the village, and its bark is not a warning but a greeting, a brief acknowledgement that you are almost home. You pass the village well, its wooden frame a dark silhouette against the stars, and the path narrows into the familiar lanes that wind between the houses, lanes that you could walk with your eyes closed and never miss a step. The sand here is loose and deep, and your sandals sink into it with a soft, shushing sound that seems very loud in the narrow space between the walls, and you can smell the faint, pleasant odor of the cooking fires and the even fainter scent of the animals that sleep in the courtyards, the donkeys and the goats and the occasional cow. The village is asleep, or nearly so, and the only sign of life is the flicker of a lamp in one window and the low murmur of a voice from somewhere deep inside a house, a parent soothing a child or an elder telling a final, quiet story before the night settles in. You reach your own house, the small mud brick structure with the single high window and the woven reed door that stands slightly ajar, and you push the door open and step inside, feeling the immediate change in the air, the coolness of the interior that clings to the walls and the floor, the smell of the dry earth and the faint, lingering scent of the morning's bread. The house is dark, but you do not need light, for your body knows this space as well as it knows the path and the quarry and the feel of the chisel in your hand, and you move through the main room with the easy, automatic steps of long familiarity, setting your water skin on its peg, leaning your reed mat against the wall, and making your way to the sleeping room at the back. The sleeping room is a small, quiet space with a floor of packed earth and a single window set high in the wall, and through that window the starlight falls in a pale, slanting beam that illuminates the woven mat on the floor and the folded linen sheet at its foot. You untie your sandals and set them aside, feeling the cool, smooth floor against the soles of your feet, and you unknot the linen kilt and hang it over the low wooden stool, standing for a moment in the darkness with your skin bare to the cool air, letting the last of the day's heat drain away from your body. Then you lie down on the mat, your back settling into the familiar contours of the woven reeds, and you pull the linen sheet over your legs and your chest, the fabric light and soft and smelling of sun and dust and the faint, clean scent of the river water in which it was washed. You lie on your back and look up at the rectangle of sky framed by the high window, and the stars that you walked under are still there, a few bright points of light that seem to look back at you with a calm, steady gaze. The sounds of the village are very faint now. The last murmur of the voice in the distance, the soft shuffle of an animal settling in its pen, and then even these sounds fade away, and the only thing you can hear is the distant, eternal pulse of the river, a sound that has been there since before you were born and will be there long after you are gone, a sound that is as much a part of the night as the stars themselves. Your body is heavy with tiredness, a deep, complete tiredness that seems to press you gently into the mat, and your muscles, which worked all day in the quarry and on the ramp and in the cool dimness of the tomb, now release their last remaining tension, softening and spreading into the support of the woven reeds beneath you. Your breath slows, becoming deeper and more regular, and your thoughts, which had been moving slowly through the memories of the day, begin to lose their edges, dissolving into a soft, formless drift of images and sensations. The white dust of the quarry, the dark mud of the ramp, the golden lamplight in the chamber, the taste of the stew, the coolness of the river water on your fingers, the silver light of the stars. These fragments float through your mind like leaves on a slow current, and they merge and separate and merge again, losing their distinctness, becoming a single peaceful stream that carries you gently towards sleep. The rectangle of sky in the window grows softer, the stars seeming to blur and expand, their light diffusing into a gentle silver glow that fills the room with a presence that is not quite brightness and not quite darkness, a state between the two that is restful and calm. The river continues its quiet murmur, a steady, rhythmic sound that has lulled countless sleepers before you and will lull countless sleepers after, and the earth beneath the house is solid and still, a foundation of stone and sand that holds you secure in the quiet darkness. You feel the boundary between your body and the mat begin to soften, the distinction between self and surface fading, and you are aware, in a distant, detached way, that you are falling asleep. But the awareness itself is gentle and carries no urgency, a simple observation that drifts through the last thin layer of waking consciousness and then is gone. The night moves on above the house, the moon climbing higher, the stars turning in their slow, majestic arcs, and the village sleeps under the vast, quiet sky. The tomb sits on its plateau, its chambers dark and still, its half-finished walls waiting for the morning and the masons and the chisels, and the quarry hollow is empty and silent, its dust settled, its tools resting where they were left. The river flows, the fields grow, the world continues its slow, patient turning, and you are a part of it all, a single, peaceful presence in the great, quiet fabric of the night, a worker who has done the day's labor and earned the night's rest, and as the last thread of thought unravels and drifts away, you surrender completely to the deep, dreamless sleep that wraps around you like the waters of the river, dark and endlessly calm.